This is the planning board meeting of the 4th of February, 2026. We'll start with roll call. Brian Dalco.
Here.
Jim Bluestein. Alden Clark.
Here.
Charlie Palmisano. Not here. Jamie Pennington.
Here.
Rick Tainter.
Here.
Pat McCare.
Here.
Via Zoom, and Matt Heffron.
Here.
We have two items on our public hearings agenda tonight. One is the Caswell development on 18 Highland Avenue. The other is the Institute Savings. We can start with Caswell development. So if someone here is representing, well, to present any updates you have.
Thank you on tonight. Jake Calvin, Calvin Development, 18 Highland Ave. Steve Sawyer, Millennium Engineering. Since the last meeting we had here a month ago, presented a different plan. Since then, we've had a site meeting. Some people from the plan were at the site meeting, neighbors and everything else. After that meeting and some conversations, we decided tweak the plan a little bit. And part of the tweaking we did was we actually slid the road forward to alleviate some of the back pressure on the development. And, we're ended up saving quite a bit more of the tree canopy. We're going to probably save it anyways, but I can memorialize it a little bit more. And we've actually alleviated some pressure on the setbacks. Before we were here, we're following the requirements for 40 right away. Now we're asking for a waiver because we're shrinking the road. What that allows us to do is pull lots forward. It pushes the road closer towards the opposite end of Arlington Street, which allows, a better use of the area. And also part of it is, since the road isn't so big, Steve will get into it, we've completely mitigated the stormwater issues. We actually did a on-site water test that the Christian Soji got the hydrocalcs on. It's good. So that's basically a quick summary of where we were before and where we're at now. Give Steve to take it from here, do the technical stuff.
All right, good evening, Steve Sawyer with Millennium Engineering. So the major changes here, what we did is we had a meeting with the planning department to try and take the pressure, pull the houses forward a bit. As part of the courts and lanes, there's the 30-foot wide right of way required for 1 to 2 houses, and then it bumps to 40 feet typically for 3 to 4. That's in the planning board regs, which the planning board can waive. They can't waive, they can't waive lot size or anything like that, but they could waive going from 40 foot to 30 foot. And with that, it allows us to pull our frontage, pull the homes, the front setback line 10 feet forward towards the road. The other change was you'll see between lot 3 and 4. Before, we had the right of way actually follow the turnaround. So instead of that, the right of way, it's just a straight right of way line with an easement for the turnaround. And what that does, it allows lot 4 to be pulled up towards Hunt. And you'll note that the side offset, that's a side offset to the rear of the property, has been enhanced from it's 10 feet required by zoning. And we've increased it to, actually, I'm trying to remember what it was. What's that, 25? Yeah, so we've added more than doubled it. So 150% of the requirement, we've provided in a tremendous setback on that end. And that's due to the fact that now we don't have a front offset around that hammerhead. So that's part of it. And then also you'll see we've added a 10-foot landscape buffer, permanent landscape buffer around the perimeter. And then the rear setbacks that for the 3 lots, the rear setbacks along towards Arlington to the north, the north side the rear lots there, we've increased the requirement is 30 feet or 20 feet, I'm sorry, 20 feet, and we've increased that to 25 feet. Another item we did, it was a little bit of confusion, was we showed footprints on the building, on the lots. We really don't know these are gonna be custom homes, that'll be designed, coordinated and designed with the homeowner, upon purchase of the lots. So we pulled the footprints that were shown, the footprints off the plan. And as part of the stormwater, calculations, what I did is assumed, I believe 5,500 square feet of impervious per lot. That's a fairly, generous impervious area, for these lots. I think previously, we had very large footprints and driveways and such. The coverage, the impervious coverage on those lots were about 4,500 square feet. So we've increased that as part of the drainage calcs. And if you could jump to the grading. All right, so the other item we did, instead of running a cut slope across the back, we provided a terrace. There's two walls, 3.5 feet each, I think below 4 feet each, that'll be planted, and that is allowing us to maintain this 3 large trees around that corner that we should be able to maintain. There will be some root damage as part of putting the wall in, but we are looking to maintain those trees by providing the terrace wall versus cutting right back to the property line. You will know, you can see in red, the faded red there. You can see there's been some significant encroachment into the property and filling on that back line. There's a patio behind lot 2. You can see there's a paver patio that's well into the property, and they've planted into the property to create a rear yard on the development property. And then on 13 Arlington, behind lot 3, you can see the fence line and the filling that substantially encroaches into the property. With that, we'll be removing that fill and creating a level area in the rear. By doing so, that's going to alleviate some of the drainage. Part of that fill kind of directed water onto 11 Arlington. There's a fair amount of water that flows across versus down towards, if you look at the existing contours, the faint gray contours, you can see that it slopes from left to right down onto 11. And what we're going to do is we're trying to restore that low area, and you can see the flow arrows in blue as we're picking up and diverting the water away from 11 Arlington there. So that should help alleviate. I believe there was some concern about exacerbating any additional runoff onto that lot. So we'll actually be making significant improvements to that. So the other item that's been changed is originally the water that ran around the north side of this lot, which we allowed it to continue to flow to the northeast corner. And what we've done is we've added, you can see a new area drain right behind, if you zoom in, right behind, right in the property line there, right there. So there's a new area drain that's picking up all of the upsold water and directing it to our stormwater system. And you can see the system hatched out in green. And this isn't one of those plastic chambers. These are 5.5 foot tall, 8 by 14 chambers, 6 of them. So basically it's a massive underground reservoir that sets on top of sand. And in the interim, what I did was we're allowed, so to determine a closer, appropriate result of how the stormwater system will behave, we performed they call it a double ring infiltrometer test, which the DEP and their regulations, they allow you to use half of that rate. So I actually use less than half of it. I think I use a third of the rate. And the results are tremendous, significant reductions. Basically, the 2 and 10-year storm, there's virtually no water. All water is collected and directed into the chamber and absorbed into the ground. The 100-year storm, there's probably, it's probably an 80% reduction off the site. So we're providing significant improvements to the existing conditions of today. So the other item that we did is, because we're overcompensating. Originally, we were trying to split the water and divert it. We had a pipe that allowed some outflow to the north corner, up on the rear, very north corner, about the left, right rear corner of lot 4. We've removed that, so there's no piping there. Any overflow goes into a very small stone sump, as you can see at the very southern end of lot 4. So with that, we simplified and improved the drainage, and we've completely mitigated and actually providing tremendous reductions in offsite flow. And this is achievable just to the fact that there's good gravel conditions that are optimal for subsurface infiltration. So those are the major changes. So we did slide the road slightly towards, the right of way was shrunken slightly. The road was slid slightly to the south. And we originally added a sidewalk, but just to mitigate, just to try and keep impervious areas minimal. In discussions with the planning department, we ended up removing that sidewalk. And I can tell, I think I've done 4 or 5 of the courts and lanes, and none of those we provided sidewalk. People just walk on the street. The traffic is insignificant, so they'll walk in the street with that. So those are the engineering changes. I think that covers the changes. I think we've done. I know we've listened. You can see behind lot 1. Maybe we'll just run through this quickly. You can see around the perimeter, there's a large tree stand behind lot 1 that we've reduced the grading and maintaining those trees. We've behind lot 2, we're maintaining 3 of the large trees. There's smaller trees down in the banking, and then I think there's a conifer or a pine planting that the owner of the abutting owner had planted, I guess, when they encroached into the lot. That would all be removed because we're taking the land back to be part of this development. Then, particularly on lot 4, there's tremendous improvements here. Before there was significant grading on lot 4, and now the whole rear half of lot 4, there's no grading required. So you can see there's trees on the right-hand corner of that lot are maintained. Also, there's a pipe that drains from the abutter onto that property, which typically is not allowed, but we're not going to change the grading, so that pipe will still be allowed to drain into the property. So those are the changes, and be happy to take any questions.
So I think what we'll do now is we'll the board for any questions or comments. Following that, we'll open up the floor for public comment. And we'll invite anyone who's interested forward with their questions. First, for the planning board, any questions? Yeah.
One question about the sidewalk. So you said that you shrunk the right of way for obvious reasons to me, and then you said when you did the calculation for drainage, you upped the impervious area so that you could do the calculation. So is the sidewalk just an economics thing, or is it you can't fit it? Can you help me with that?
Yes, well, part of it is because we're reducing to be able to bring those lots forward. If we include the distance of the sidewalk, that's going to limit our front side. So to pull pressure off the street, we were looking to maximize as much as possible, pushing it towards the high school flat. So if you look on we don't have the original, but if you look at the original plan, if you see here, like if you look at the road and you see all those red trees that are wiped out, originally we were looking to save all those trees.
Mm.
So what we were doing is taking input from the neighborhood and everything else. We're looking to alleviate any pressure towards Arlington Street, and what we ended up doing is we're looking for every foot we can get, and pretty much the calculations of adding the footage of the sidewalk, and that's also adds to impervious, and we're having concerns and questions about, is our stormwater good? The less impervious we have, the better. So we can prove that it's gonna work.
And actually, another item that I guess I forgot to mention and change, originally we had a 20-foot wide roadway. We did widen it, to 22. So there's a little bit of extra width in roadway, compensate for that also. And to be honest, I think, you know, people don't, it won't be used, people just walking the street. It's like, most of the side streets.
I mean, that's a philosophical thing. We'll agree to disagree on.
Yeah.
I appreciate your input.
Well, there's a reason behind it.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
It was,
discussed.
we're, you know, we're taking input from all the players and we're trying to get to the best possible solution, just some things, there's some gonna go.
Understood. Thank you.
On the drainage plan or the grading plan, sorry. Couple of questions. The orange dashed line is that the erosion control?
Yes.
So why does that go all the way to lot 4? Because you're not really touching a lot of stuff.
Actually, the reason it's still back there is because I didn't move it from the previous plan.
Okay. So that's a related question. Related question, why are you taking down significant trees in the back if you're not touching the grading?
That is that's a building area. That's an area where it's potential. We wanted to be forthcoming. Okay, most likely, you know, before we had the house pushing way to the rear. We don't, given the fact that we've taken away the pressure of that front offset, it'll definitely come forward. But we want to be forthcoming. So, okay, there's a possibility there might be, you know, there's a building there. There could be some, you know, there may be a patio in the rear. So we want to be in some, most people don't want a house 5 feet from there, you know, I mean, a tree 5 feet from their house. So we wanted to be accurate and forthcoming of what we foresee for the trees to remain.
So with the ultimate plan, you have the erosion control barrier pulled forward.
Yes.
As far as the retaining walls behind lots 2 and 3, it's just those two sections. I guess I was just curious, is the top of the retaining wall behind lot 2, is that at the existing grade?
Yes. Yeah. So there's no grading. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's the details, I think it provided a section of that, cross section, if you look at the details.
We're just trying to, I mean, were you on the site today?
Yes.
We're trying, we're gonna cut that hill without, you know, shearing it. We need to support that. So
Right.
it needs retainage.
Mhm.
In that same area, and you mentioned, I think that you're cutting into the roots of a couple of those trees. Does that retaining wall need to be that far back? Can you design it so that it doesn't affect those trees?
Well, ultimately, we're doing, I mean, these things are like difficult, like ultimately, early on, we show like a mass wipeout of the trees. When I go in, do that, you know, save as much as I can. But in terms of when we're doing this, the wall area, I mean, you know, I'm gonna save those trees, so if I can swing the wall, okay, swing the wall. I just, you know, we can't definitively tell you exactly what the roots are doing this right now. Every effort's gonna be made to save those trees. We're not gonna go in and say, well, you get it. I honestly, mature trees like that, for safety. There's no sense wiping them up, they do have to use.
I guess I'm just, I would, if you have that.
I guess the question is, let's slide that down 25 feet to show it. No, we're trying to maximize the land use as much as we can and probably try to reclaim the land that's been encroached on. I guess the answer.
Any other questions? I have a few questions. First of all, I think this is great progress. Following our conversations, I think you're moving in the right direction. Two things to talk about still. So let's since we're talking about retaining wall, let's talk about that. And just to throw out a few numbers, if you were to build a minimum lot size in R2 residential, you know, the generic lot is 90 feet wide by like 111 feet. That's a 10,000 square foot lot. And the buildable area that comes out of the setback is 70 feet wide by 61 feet deep. So it's about 4,200. And that is what the city is saying is, you know, relative to a lot of the existing neighborhoods, it's a very generous buildable area for a house plus a two-car garage. There's still plenty of room in 4,200 square feet for that footprint. When I look at your layout, all of the buildable areas are significantly larger than that. And if I look at lots 2 and 3 in particular, the buildable area is about 70 feet wide generically, and it's probably 100 feet deep. So that is 7,000 square feet relative to 4,200 square feet, which tends to be looked at as very generous in the city generally. So the impression is that you know, that puts pressure on that rear property line where there's an existing slope, where there's a lot of existing trees. I get what you're saying about the encroachments on the land, and I totally agree with everything you're saying relative to that. But I fundamentally don't understand why you couldn't move that rear yard setback further. Create a buildable area that maybe it's not 4,200 square feet, maybe it's, you know, 5,000 square feet, 6,000 square feet, but move that rear setback forward. And I don't understand fundamentally why you couldn't keep the existing grade back there and keep all of those trees and create more of a natural buffer between lots 2 and 3 and the Arlington Street.
What trees are you referring to stable?
The ones in red that are inside
Those
of
are
the
all,
retaining.
those are bushes.
Not all. Not all. So that's one comment. Another comment about site layout. When I look at lot 1, the dimension across the rear property line is about 116 feet on your plan. If the lot line between lot 1 and 2 moved, say, 16 feet to the west, to the left on the plan, and all of those other intermediate property lines move to the left, and the result is the buildable area footprint in lot 4 moves also to the left, and maybe you stay off of some of those existing trees back there. All of your lots end up pretty much the same area. Lot number 1 gets a little bit smaller, but again, the buildable area you have there is much larger than what you would end up with a generic R2 site, 10,000 square foot site. So that's another suggestion that I would like you to think about. I think the vegetated buffer is a very good idea. I think it's your property line is something that is important to you, and establishing that hedge all the way around is, to me, I think the right thing to be doing, but I don't think we understand what that is exactly. And we would want to understand in more detail what plant materials you're talking about, what's the scale of that, what does that look like generally? Sidewalk we talked about. I think the only other initial comment I have is that ultimately in this process, we're going to want to see some sense of scale of residential buildings, character of residential buildings, to the extent that you can do that. I think understanding the scale and the nature of those residential structures relative to the broader neighborhood is very important. So I heard you mention earlier that these would be custom houses, built by individual owners. I think it's important that we understand, you know, scale, and that's part of the overall final approval. Those are my additional comments right
Speak to that. So I understand the point you're coming from, like, what's this, what's that? Ultimately, design for a project like this, I know it's hard to understand that we have ordinances on the books that allow us to do certain things, and I understand, like, realistically speaking, are you gonna put 7,000 square footprint on that? No, you know what I mean? No one's gonna do that. That's ridiculous. But in terms of going to like showing scale and design, if you have the point of this project, sell a lot to a homeowner who can then build their own custom home. So the point of doing some type of elevation on something that may not exist doesn't make much sense. In a situation like this is a land use board, so like we should be here talking about land use. I understand that, theoretically, if I designed everything and knew who was going to buy them and I knew what it was going to be, I wish I could, to be honest with you. But the reality of the market, I can't. But say, argument's sake, say I draw a colonial and someone wants a ranch. What's the point of drawing that colonial? It doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So, like, in terms of, I might be open to maybe reducing some of the setbacks and stuff like that, but I can't get into theories of what I don't want. I like to be honest about what we're going to be doing here as a project. That's why we're forthcoming with, yeah, we're probably going to take, we're going to definitely take, like, we're hammering down. Yeah, we're definitely not going to do this. In terms of, we get into like home design criteria. I don't want to be disingenuous. I don't want to draw, like I said, I don't want to draw a ranch or someone doing a cage.
But at the same time, it can't be a blank slate.
Excuse me?
At the same time, it can't be a blank slate. In a neighborhood like this, where you've got proximity to so many individual properties, it can't just be,
We have ordinances on the books that control this. Right now, we have ordinances.
but we have, as part of this review process, the potential for reviewing and commenting on it. I think we're going to need to keep talking.
You guarantee someone's going to buy the house we draw? That's the question I have.
Well, last time we talked, I thought you were going to do so.
No, I never once said. I wanted this project, I want to bring online, just like I did Toomey Drive. These are buildable lots. The problem Newburyport's happening is you can't go buy a piece of land and build a house. You gotta go buy a house built in the 1950s and you gotta rip it down. And then you gotta build something on a lot that's really small and you're really limited on it. I'm not gonna sit here and, realistically as a builder, no one's gonna build 7,000 square foot, 3 stories. That's ridiculous. No one does. But in terms of when you're limiting ground here, when you're looking at something, so if you're looking at arguments, I have a 1,500 square foot first floor footprint. Okay? You stack it up 3 floors. I'm at 4,500 square feet. Everyone's like, well, that's good. Well, yeah, but you're also looking at an older couple that's looking to have a 2-car garage in a first floor master ranch. That's only 1 story. Well, that first floor footprint takes up a lot more area. So in terms of getting into an area, we're talking about full design, you're going down a slippery slope where we can't, I can't, we're not going to say that what it's going to be. We're trying to be as forthcoming as we can with what it is. But, we have, we have zoning, we have zoning requirements. I can't build in certain, and we're actually being really sensitive towards home setbacks, closer, moving things here. I mean, ultimately, I've said this before, I don't build junk, I want to be a nice neighborhood, but the place to design a really nice project is not this forum. It's not a forum of that board and this person doesn't like that window, and this person doesn't like that. I mean, we have all those houses.
I see what you're saying, but the 7,000 square foot is on your plan. To me, it's much preferable.
I may be willing to,
If I could,
go to
if I
that.
could- to me, it's much preferable. If I were buying lot number 2, it would be much preferable if I saw natural grade at the rear of the site and a stand of trees back there that exist, rather than a flat yard devoid of trees with retaining walls at the rear.
And we can, I agree that it's a,
Yeah, I don't see why you're doing it. I don't understand.
that's a village, and we're bringing it back to national.
That's all I have now.
Understood.
Any other questions or comments? Let we open it up for public comment then. Just a reminder that we have a limitation of about 2 minutes per speaker. And please try to not repeat things, speaker to speaker. Thanks very much.
Good evening, Carl Hassinger. I posted a letter today. You might not have seen it, so I make copies. Thank you.
Could you give us your name and address, please?
Yes, Carl Hassinger, 11 Arlington. So why am I here tonight? You could arguably say that I'm the most impacted abutter. I'm literally abutted on 3 sides. I'm being surrounded by the subdivision. My primary concern is mass. We're talking about potentially 35-foot tall structures looming just 10 feet from my property line on 3 sides. To make matters worse, the building footprints were actually removed from the latest plan, which further obscures just how close and imposing these structures will be. I and my wife and my children are facing the prospect of being boxed in by walls. Previously, I've submitted letters to the board detailing issues regarding an unlabeled easement and mislabeled drainage pipe. And those issues are again repeated in my letter today. Additionally, in today's letter, I'm asking the board to verify that the work will not detrimentally affect my property. What I'm getting at there is, with so much activity potentially happening within 10 feet of my property line, there are trees, there are tree stumps. If those are removed with that excavator, it is highly likely that my fence and my retaining walls will be damaged. And just to be clear, I am not someone who has encroached on the property. I have a legal easement. This is maybe the 4th or 5th attempt I'm making to get that legal easement clearly put on the plan. I want to be clear that what I've asked for so far, the easement isn't a concession. That's just clarifying paper. And asking for no adverse impacts to my property is, or should be, a typical condition and requirement. I'm not here to stop Mr. Caswell from building this land. I'm not asking to stop the project. I'm asking the board for one single concession: greater setbacks for the homes on lots 3 and 4. I simply ask that the structures be kept within the building areas marked on my submitted plan, which is on the last page of the letter I sent in. You can see that it pushes back to behind where my fence is, keeping the 10-foot setback there. What I've learned is that's not really setback, it's not setback, but again, look back, clarification on that as well. Mr. Caswell has already granted setback concessions to other less impacted abutters. I am asking for the same consideration. That's all. If this board makes those specific setbacks a condition of approval and the other bookkeeping items that I've listed on the plan, this is a project I can support. I'm not in opposition here. I'm simply trying to prevent myself from being boxed in. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, my name is Natalie Nash. I live at 19 Arlington Street. Thank you for your continued attention to the concerns of the Arlington Street neighbors. The plans dated January 26th indicate that a number of mature trees will be preserved, which is an improvement over the previous plan. However, many trees are still indicated for destruction. An informal tree survey by neighbors identified approximately 19 mature trees with a minimum of 6-inch diameter. The destruction of these trees will subject abutting properties to increased solar and wind exposure and storm management concerns. Our city is struggling to address the very real impacts of climate change, and this must be taken into consideration by the planning board and by developers. My husband and I submitted public comment letters on January 4th and February 2nd, and thank you for granting me the time to read through some of the highlights. The root structures of the remaining trees must be preserved with a buffer area at least to their drip edge. Otherwise, the survival of the trees is in jeopardy. A certified arborist should review the landscape plan to promote the likelihood that trees will survive over time. The trees to be preserved should be marked to ensure that they are not cut down during construction. And the preservation of these trees needs to be memorialized as a condition to the special permit with penalties for violations. It's worth noting that the current owner destroyed numerous trees in violation of the existing variance, which calls for a green belt buffer zone. The latest plan shows a 10-foot vegetative buffer behind lots 2, 3, and 4, which is an improvement, but this should also be provided at lot 1. Further, a clear description of vegetative buffer should be provided, and it should include the preservation of any existing trees within the buffer area. The rear yard setback is now increased from 25 feet to 30 feet at lots 2, 3, and 4, which is an improvement. This should also be provided at lot 1. At the southwest corner of lot 2, where at about 17, 19, and 23 Arlington Street, there are numerous mature trees. This was something that we were just talking about, adjacent to a natural slope. This is where the plans call for one end of the proposed retaining wall, preservation of only 3 trees, and the destruction of the remaining trees. This will greatly increase wind and solar exposure to our home. Furthermore, we do not think that the 3 trees to be preserved will be viable due to the destruction of the tree roots caused by the installation of the retaining wall. The proposed retaining wall should be eliminated. If the mature existing trees, approximately 22 trees and numerous smaller trees, along the slope at lot 3 were preserved rather than destroyed, there would be no need for a retaining wall. The resulting benefits would be numerous. It would reduce costs to the developer. It would eliminate a retaining wall maintenance cost and headache to the new homeowner. It would provide a natural vegetated screen for all homeowners, and it would eliminate a potential hazard. The developer should provide a plan that shows the massing of the new homes, as we've been discussing, so that butters better understand the impact of what is being proposed. And we think that if one of the new houses was located on Highland Avenue at the current site of the doctor's office, with access off the lane, it would preserve the residential streetscape along Highland Avenue and allow for an improved site plan for the remaining 3 new homes. We would like the developer to consider this or tell us why it cannot be done. And lastly, we support the proposed zoning ordinance amendment to courts and lanes, and we think it is likely that it will be approved by the City Council. We would be highly appreciative if Mr. Caswell would use this opportunity to improve the site plan, and we think it would be a win-win for all concerned.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Casey. I've lived at 19 Arlington Street for 27 years. Hope to reside there for another decade at least. Tonight, I'd like to briefly reflect on something that happened 47 years ago. On June 12, 1979, the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals granted a variance to a group of doctors to turn a modest home at 18 Highland Ave into a doctor and parking lot. Can you imagine being a neighbor of 18 Highland Ave in 1979 and suddenly having the extensive woods behind your house turned into a parking lot? The ZBA granted the doctors a variance, but it came with conditions. The third condition states, and I quote, "The so-called green belt zone, which constitutes the remainder of the property, shall remain undeveloped, thus affording continuing privacy to the abutters." Undeveloped, continuing privacy to the abutters until now. I thought that a variance traveled with the land and that a condition of a variance was irrevocable. It seems that this is an example of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. It's the rigid interpretation of the law of private property rights versus an interpretation of the law that would allow development with a sense of fairness to the neighbors in the neighborhood. This latest proposal constitutes possibly the second injury to the environment, the neighbors, and the historic neighborhood. In 1979, the new use of the property at 18 Highland Ave necessitated a variance resulting in certain conditions. In 2026, should not a new use of the property also require conditions that reflect the intent of the Greenbelt Buffer Zone? I encourage the planning board and the applicant to review the 16 public comment letters that have been submitted by neighbors. Many of our concerns have not been addressed. In some cases, important details are lacking. For example, rear setbacks from abutters' properties are not treated equitably. Here it's 25 feet and there it's 30 feet. Or how will the few trees that are to be spared be protected? And it goes on and on. The details are in our letters. Our questions and comments are in our letters. Please give our public comments a second consideration. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
My name is Peter Pitson. We live on 7 Arlington Street. And we were one of the neighbors back in 1980. We had just moved in there. I've already submitted a submission about variance. In fact, it was something we took for granted for the last 47 years, as Mr. Casey mentioned. I've also submitted something today, you may not have seen it. It's more technical questions on the current plan, which is an improvement. You can comment on those at your leisure. But I'm just thinking, why are we doing this? I've talked to one of the doctors' groups there at 18 Highland Avenue, Deanna Jake's group. Yeah, moving across the street. As far as I know, the other people there, they're still advertising. What a great location this is. It's near to the hospital. It gives you access to all the machinery there, the MRIs, the CAT scans, the X-rays. It's very close to the high school. You can throw a rock from the high school. It's near the middle school. And these are this is a pediatric clinic that is there. So why are we doing this? Why are we going from R3 to R2 when 47 years ago it was an emergency to make it R3 right next to the hospital? Has Anna Jakes had any commentary on this? Is it okay to go into any business zone or industrial zone and just put a house in there? So I don't know.
My name is Nan Ma. I also live at 11 Arlington Street. Would you mind pulling up the plan that shows, just to give a sense of where our property is? We're the one that juts down and abuts both lot 3 and lot 4. We talked about 25-foot setback. It's increased to 30 feet at some places, but the fact of the matter is it is 10 feet along 3 sides of our property. And this is, I feel like, another instance of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. All of our other neighbors are granted at least a 25-foot setback, yet we are surrounded on 3 sides with only 10-foot setback. And we are just asking for a little bit of space and a little bit of breathing room. I do agree that we've moved forward in some respects in this latest, but not showing where the buildable lots will be, I believe, is a step back. And this is something that I would urge the board to push for in the next iteration. Another thing that I want to bring up is the installation of the drain pipe. It is right up against our fence, which I believe is within their right to do. However, we have very serious concerns about how this will be installed without injuring our fence. There's also our retaining wall, which is on our property, as well as a line of mature trees that are also on our property. So this is something that we want to make sure is done responsibly and with respect to not injuring our property. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'm going to close public comment.
We do that. Vote, comment from Steve. Do you want to identify yourself?
Yes, this is Stephen Hochbrunn. I live at 5 Arlington Street with my wife, Mary Jo Palermo, and I'd certainly be at the meeting in person if it wasn't for the fact that I'm quite a ways away on a long planned vacation. Listen, first of all, I wanted to express my appreciation for the efforts that have resulted in the increased setbacks in many areas of the property and the permanent landscape buffer. I do have some concern about how we would ensure the permanence of that buffer, and as was mentioned previously, exactly what it would entail. I, of course, agree with everything that's been said so far by my just wonderful neighbors. I would only add a couple of things, and I can keep this short. I, from the very beginning, have been concerned about the size of the homes. I mean, Mr. Caswell, as I've written in a letter to the board, I readily acknowledge he builds a very nice, high-quality home, but from what I've seen, they are big. So although they're custom homes, I think it's a fair assumption they're going to be big homes. And this concerns us, my wife and me, a great deal. And I know many of my neighbors, has previously been expressed. And to me, is kind of analogous to being on a beach at an island and you're having the time of your life, and suddenly a giant cruise ship enters the harbor and it destroys the atmosphere, ruins the experience. But you know, it's short term and you know that ship is going to leave before nightfall, and so you can kind of live with it. Well, this is where the analogy fails, is these these homes are going to be with us for a very long time, which is why I support what Madeline mentioned in her comments, a plan that shows the massing of the homes, or some general idea, because although you can say this is a land use board, Well, the size of the homes has a tremendous impact on the land and how we, the abutters, will be affected. So I'm all in favor of that. Just one other thing, the stormwater operation and maintenance plan, which I've read in Appendix D of Millennium Engineering's report, is very clear, but it's also rather complicated in the sense that it will require a great deal from the homeowners association. I think I read that catch basins have to be inspected and evaluated 4 times a year, other things. And what concerns my wife, and she pointed out in her letter, how do we know this is legally binding? Furthermore, what if they don't do, if the homeowners association doesn't live up to the letter of the law and doesn't do required maintenance and repairs, what recourse will we have as homeowners? I like so much of what I've heard tonight, the idea of potentially moving the lots to the left. There's so many ideas that are being presented here, but also many questions and concerns, which is why, in my view, because of what we're hearing, and more time is needed for all parties to address what's going on here, especially in light of the enormous impact that this no one can deny. No one, this is not a point of debate. This is going to have an enormous impact on our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
We also have Jay McGovern. Did you want to address the board? Jay, did you want to use the public comment period? You'll have to unmute on your end. We can't hear you, Jay, if you're comment. It's indicated to us that you're muted on your end.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, hi. Sorry for the delay. My name is James McGovern. I'm a resident of 23 Arlington Street since 1981. Just a fabulous place to live and to raise our family. I'd like to thank Mr. Caswell and his team for the changes they've made thus far. We really appreciate that. I share the concerns of several of my neighbors about the project. First and foremost, the project seems inappropriately out of scale with the housing in our neighborhood, and I think others are addressing this. We also have concerns about the possibility of losing many mature trees that are not necessary to be removed. And again, I see that a lot of people have commented on that, and work is underway to modify that. We also have concerns related to the construction process, which comes after approval, of course, but the chaos that will rain down on our neighborhood for a period of months or longer during the construction phase. We just hope that city officials and the developer pay close attention to the neighbors during that phase. I just want to thank the planning board and other city officials for their service, all of which mostly are volunteers. And thank you for your attention to these matters. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll close public comment. We can bring this back to the board for further comment and deliberation. And maybe we could start with a discussion about what's happening relative to the zoning amendment.
Yeah. So,
Might impact.
yeah, I think all planning board members are aware of this. Yeah.
Huh? Still in the meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Why?
Can you see me when I walk by here?
Jack, just letting you know, we're just muting you for a moment. At any rate, I think planning board members are aware, we have some city councils here, and city council is aware, obviously. But I think Jay, as applicant, is where the city council has a zoning amendment that's in committee now. The planning board will be joining the city council on the 18th to have a joint public hearing about that amendment. Quick synopsis of that amendment essentially is that it goes in and touches this particular section of the zoning ordinance called courts and lanes that deals with the types of permitting for putting, in this case, up to 4 lots, accessing what's essentially a roadway reduced to some sort of shared driveway, essentially sort of on that spectrum. recognizing that it's not gonna have a heavy flow of traffic essentially. But it's a discretionary permit. And so in that review process, the planning board does not actually have the flexibility to modify or reduce the lot size requirements or dimensional requirements. Understandably, in a given context like this, the applicant would have to avail themselves of some of those things, ask for some reductions. But an example of that, as it might pertain to something like this, is of course how this relates to this project. We'll see certainly in months. But what I think is worth noting, and the reason why I think is correct is important to note here is in the coming weeks, hopefully the planning board will also have greater ability akin to what the ZBA has, the zoning board of appeals, to be able to work with the applicant to reduce, for example, without sort of going through the whole plan or every option, something like the front setback being reduced further than the 25 feet required as a default under zoning. Subzoning across the Commonwealth, for instance, that's essentially superimposed on top of the landscape. And so we might debate whether or not we think those setbacks, for instance, make sense today versus made 7 years ago. And so all that being said, in this case, it would allow the applicant to ask for this to be reduced, thereby allowing essentially everything that's happening in the lot to be brought forward towards the developed roadway rather than the abutting properties. As Jay and Steve mentioned during the presentation, there's the ability for the planning board right now to work within the right of way as part of the subdivision piece of this, but they don't have the ability right now as the board to grant reductions over here the way that the zoning board of appeals could. So in essence, this zoning amendment makes that tool available to both the applicant and the planning board to be able to utilize that if that aspect is taken into account in a future revision of a plan like this. Something worth noting. Hopefully that will backtrack itself procedurally, so to speak, so that it becomes a tool that is useful.
Take the timing in.
Well, I'll leave that to our city council members, but the reality is we're probably, I think we're talking like, a month or two out, so the earliest time frame because we have to have the joint public hearing on the 18th. City council rules require typically 2 readings or 2 votes. That's usually 2 regular council meetings that are after that meeting on the 18th. City council can waive rules, for good reason to expedite things that are timely. And so it could waive rules, and that's something we can discuss. I'll leave that to the council, of course. But it would require the adoption by the council before the applicant could, the board could use that additional feature. That might go to the question of what happens next.
Any other comments or questions?
I have one question about the height of the existing houses along Arlington versus the, say, maximum height you would see inside the development. Maybe it's just an elevations question. I'm trying to get the mass relative to the
So what happens here in the grading, so as you work your way, so lot 2 is substantially, the first floor of the house will be substantially lower than the first floor to the lot. I'm not sure which Arlington, Arlington is. So, yeah, so we're roughly, I think our probably second story is probably akin to their first story. So the massing of, the massing of if you had a story and a half or 2.5 story, you're only seeing the top, the top half of it. What happens is as Arlington Street slopes down readily, so you were, lots 2 and 3 are lower, but there's less of a difference as you get to lot 3 and then lot 4. It's pretty much level across towards Arlington Street there. After as you can picture, Arlington Street's up here, and we're kind of catch up with it. I could update it. So, okay, first floor here. I can figure that out and show it just so we have an idea. Line of sight. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I have a 3-part question. I think some of the things that the neighbors have asked kind of volunteered in the presentation itself. So I'm wondering, first part of my question is wondering of the list of requests that you heard, which ones are already on your to-do list that you would probably incorporate? And my second question, I'll just get my question out and you can answer. The second question is, I was thinking a lot about your aversion to defining the structures that will be built there. And I respect the argument that you're selling lots, you're not selling finished homes on the spec. I think that's a reasonable position. However, I think, I'm curious if you think, because I was debating this in my mind, if you're almost doing yourself a disservice by not illustrating what you think the maximum size of these homes might actually be, because to some extent, the imagination is going wild. These could be 15, 20,000 square foot homes, and you don't intend to do that. So, and also, by the way, they're lower than the homes on Arlington, and we have nothing to illustrate that. So I'm wondering if you might want to reconsider volunteering some envelopes that are bigger than what you think might even be built. I mean, some of the homes on Arlington are quite large. I mean, the one at, I think at 11 is about 3,000, maybe a little under 3,000. Just one lot away, further down the hill is, according to our assessor, is about 3,700 square feet. So there's some large homes there. And I'm wondering if the imagination isn't just going wild a little bit about what could possibly be. So I would urge you to reconsider maybe showing the envelopes and committing to something that's bigger maybe than someone would really want, but isn't as big as maybe some people are fearing. And, oh, by the way, if you got it wrong and you sell a lot, there would be a mechanism to make some revisions under a minor modification or something like that. It wouldn't be a completely etched in stone envelope from my perspective, as long as the deviations were within reason. So,
I mean, honestly, fair. I mean, listening to this, like, so quite honestly, the way, you know, put you in my mind, the way I've been as a developer is I like to have as much leeway to be as creative as possible. I don't, you know, and I'm also a late rights advocate. You know, if you allow to do this, going to do that. I mean, listening to all the feedback today, I'd be willing to figure out, okay, we will maximize our ground floor level at X number. You know what I mean? I'd be willing to do something like that. I don't, you know, I'm not trying to be coy and sneaky about, I don't want to draw pictures because I just want to be honest. I don't know what I'm going to build. But obviously, we can get back and come to some reasonable limitation of what we think it's going to be. That's a reasonable ask. And in terms of some of the stuff that was asked before, like not answering directly, I believe 11 Arlington Street, we do have noted the
easements. Right, yeah,
on
probably have, yeah.
there's like a lot of stuff that's come through, which I think a lot of it is from the last time, but I think we'd have to comb through, but like it is noted, I think, beyond just for argument's sake, and you go to S2, and you have to click on all. Yeah.
You said as
It's gonna be
Yeah,
the third one.
Yeah, so the easements,
Zoom in on.
yeah, so the easements were, they've been added.
This is the easement with the dot. It's showing the easement, and the easement shows, Steve's gotta clean this up. Steve also like little hatch box, 816, 814. Those are we went in there and showed. It's because before we had feedback concerns of water flow in 11, we wanted to actually know what the right was over there because we had to get permission from them to get in there. So those are actually spot grades.
Yeah, the
easement is on there. There's a lot of concerns, which I can understand, you know, there's a lot of idiots out there that will have this stuff. I get the concerns people have. Yes, you gotta trust me. You know, we probably want to snatch things. They can make me fix it. But I understood, I mean, listen to what you're saying, that's a reasonable answer. I think that's something we can call and work together and come up with. I couldn't imagine what 21,000 square home would cost.
I think what you're hearing,
Looks like we're back in a month. It's like,
I think what you're hearing generally is progress here. I think a lot of what you're saying is moving this in the right direction. I think the message is clear that those existing trees are really important to think about. I would reiterate again, you know, I don't understand the retaining walls and the need for that. And if the byproduct of that is saving more of those trees, I think that's moving in the right direction. I would also encourage you to, if you can, shift everything, 15 feet to the west. And try to stay off of more of those trees in lot 4. That's all on the plus side. And so I think what's interesting to me is this is an as-of-right plan. And, you know, there's another overlay to this that is, you know, the latitude we might have at some point, March, perhaps, to look at this in different ways relative to, you know, different dimensions. But this is an as-of-right plan, which I think with a little bit of pushing and pulling, can keep moving this in the right direction. I don't know what your reaction is to the timing relative to the zoning amendment. But you're willing to let that play
Since the
play
meeting
out.
we had months ago, I don't know what happened with the amendment. I don't know where it is. I don't know the wording on it.
The first meeting relative to, as Andy was saying, is
2 weeks
February
ago.
18th.
Open meetings and something come up and now.
Yeah, so
You know, it's one of those things. I don't want to agree to something that I don't want to step in a bear trap. You know, it's just the way it is.
yeah, if I could, Jeff, just FYI, so again, with the tool here being essentially that you could ask for reduction of some things, like I mentioned, the front setback, for instance, could be reduced up to 50%, that would allow you to bring some other things forward, perhaps.
Well, if I can reduce the front setback if I can pull that front setback forward, I'm willing to give up the retaining wall. I mean, it's a horse trade.
Right,
All it is.
right, and again, without prejudicing your side, the board side, right, of this discussion, just recognizing that, it's probably gonna be sort of a harsh time frame that we're talking about, you know, that this will disclose maybe, at the earliest, but just procedurally, because of the council process. But the hearing is happening on the 18th here, joint public hearing between both, and without, you know, making any presumption about the adoption of it, if it's there, I think that would, if you might want to think to Bob's earlier point, even though it's a little bit premature when the tool is available to both you and the board, you may be able to sketch out thinking with Steve, you know, what would that look like if you brought that forward? Because you could either talk to the board informally about it at that point, you could put the amendments, you know, available or in place, but also you could sort of experiment with the plan and see what that does to shape up your feet.
Also, like to move forward. Things are set in stone.
Understand.
Yeah. Some of those flexibility may not work too well.
And I know how the process works. I'd like to just move with an end in sight.
You've been very patient with the
Thank you. So we'll come back in March.
Yeah,
I just want to be careful, because, well, first of all, this really is strictly an as of right, because it needs a special permit. It'll be as of right if we get it. So it really is this discretion in planning. The problem we have is that we'd like to have more discretion, and that's what the intent of zoning amendment is. So I guess the concern I have is whether you want to revise the plan based on the current zone, or work, as Andy suggested, maybe to come up with a concept plan based on the proposed. Because I would hate to have you come with another plan.
I would prefer to work towards current rules.
You would.
With the ability to understand. That's all.
Okay, so that might, keeping in mind, that might mean you have to do more revisions and plans.
Well, ultimately, so in terms of, I'm playing with lot lines and stuff like that. This is what it costs me money. When I have to redo a road, and he has to go out there and redo the whole thing, that's a lot of money.
So that's why I don't really.
I'm not playing with the road. I'm not changing the road. So if I get to play with lot lines and stuff like that, then, you know, it's, you know, we have to go. If this guy's cheap, I'm kind of down.
I just am cautious that we don't want to invite you to do 2 revisions when you might only have to do 1.
I understand the flexibility of the amendment coming. I don't know what's, you know, to me, the only thing that, you know, when I met with the chairman, he was talking about swooshing the lots. I wouldn't do that. I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna reduce my lots to 7,000 square feet. There's no way I'm gonna do that. But in terms of there's some flexibility and setbacks and pulling and prodding with that, yeah, I would do that. But none of that will actually change my stormwater design or anything like that. So I prefer to keep moving, on a set thing, come the fourth, we stay on, that's what it says the fourth, and then you say, geez, these guys figure this out, well, then I can, okay, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks from there, you know what I mean? I just like to stay on course, doing with the rules that we have in hand, because I like to work in the known, not the unknown, Try to stop using hand.
No, I think the earlier discussion about much smaller lots is,
That's gone.
well.
Yeah, I'll do small lots, give me 10 of them.
That was a good way to start a discussion, and, I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think we're talking about detail and dimensions now. So if we can keep the conversation going. The zoning amendment will allow us the latitude to talk about the 15-foot front yard setback. That's a big deal. So let's see how that plays out.
We'll see you guys.
I think what we need is a motion relative to a continuation.
I move to continue the special permit application and the definitive subdivision approval application for 18 Highland Avenue to March 4th, 2023.
Second.
I'm going to do a roll call vote. Jack is online. So Brian,
Yes.
Alden,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Jack, McCarry,
Yes.
Matt Humphrey.
Yes.
And I'm also, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, second item on the meeting, the public hearing agenda is institution savings. Someone representing the applicant,
Yes, sir.
bring us up to date.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, I'm Matt Costa from Mead, Tallerman and Costa. My partner, Lisa Mead, made the submittal on behalf of the Institution for Savings, and I'm here representing IFS tonight. Nice to see some familiar faces, but also a few not so familiar faces. I was heavily involved in this project, as was my partner, Lisa, back in 2020, 2021, when this was last for the planning board, both prior to and subsequent to the litigation that occurred. And ultimately, on remand from the land court, this board issued both a special permit and a site plan approval for the construction of an addition to IFS property at 93 State Street. I'm not going to rehash much of the history. I do have a fairly lengthy presentation, although I will say that most of it is photographs, so we can work through it relatively quickly. But what brings us before the board tonight is a request for an amendment to the special permit that was issued back in 2022. And the source of the request, and I know that some of you are well aware of this already because there have been offline discussions that have been occurring between representatives of the board, staff, the applicant's representatives. I should have said at the outset, Mike Jones and Kim Rocker, both in attendance, president and vice president of the bank, and Christopher Angelakis, the project architect, is also in attendance, and they'll be available should you have specific questions about what we're proposing. But at the source of our proposal is a request that you approve
a radiator that is located on the roof of the constructed addition to the IFS building. The purpose of the radiator is that it functions in conjunction with a generator that provides backup power to the building. The generator was a source of much discussion back in, well, I don't want to say necessarily in 2020, but certainly on remand when the matter came back before the board, was a source of much discussion. The strong preference of the board at the time was to ensure that generator was an interior generator inside the structure. As you can appreciate and imagine, generators are not necessarily quiet. So the desire was to ensure that was located interior to the building. I want to say at the outset, because I know that I saw at least one bit of correspondence submitted to the board prior to tonight's meeting, expressing potential concerns related to noise. We are proposing no changes to that interior generator. The generator will continue to be located in the same location as was proposed when we were previously before the board. What is before the board tonight is not the generator itself, but it's the radiator. The radiator, of course, can't be interior to the building. It needs to be exterior to the building. And as I said before, has been located on the roof of the building. The challenge is that the radiator is a bit larger than we had anticipated it was going to be and has been constructed in a manner per manufacturer specifications that is not quite as was anticipated when this project originally got approved. And so we have worked over the course of the past couple of months to try and present solutions. I think if you refer to the correspondence we submitted even as recently as mid-December, just before Christmas, you'll see that what we were requesting at the time was very simple. We were asking that this board approve more or less retroactively the location and the design of the radiator as it presently exists on the building. It is higher, it is somewhat bulkier than was anticipated, but that was our request. I will be candid, we are somewhat falling on our sword, or at least I am tonight, coming before the board because we have worked through some alternatives and we concede that an alternative is appropriate. And so I think the question for this board is going to be which alternative is the board's preference. We've worked through, suffice it to say, over a dozen probably alternatives. We're not presenting you with a dozen. Some of those we thought you'd like even less than the proposed, the existing condition. Others were not feasible from an engineering or design perspective in terms of where the radiator would need to be located or how it would need to be constructed. But again, we've narrowed it down to four possibilities, two of which are similar to one another. But four possibilities that we hope will be at least one of which will be to the board's liking. So with that, let's talk about the current radiator. Again, I know that all of you have likely been by the site and have seen what's at issue, but we're going to provide some pictometry and as well as some actual photographs to give you a sense of it. So the good news is in this first photograph, you can't see it, but that's because this is taken from State Street, immediately in front of the historic building. This is at the corner of State and Prospect. And I will say it's difficult because all of you are a distance from the screen and the screen is within the screen. But Andy, if maybe you could zoom in a bit on this photograph. This also shows the tree overlay. But if you could zoom in toward that center section, you can sort of see there on the left, right, behind the trees. And we've removed the tree overlay in a number of these. We wanted to show you realistic existing condition, but we also wanted to show you what it would look like without trees, recognizing that trees are not a guarantee in perpetuity, and trees are not a guarantee year round.
Can I just ask one question, Mr. Chair? Has everyone seen it in real life? Has everyone gotten by to see it? Because I think we've seen it, right? So I'm not sure how many renderings of that you need to go through because we're advanced to the point where we understand. Is that fair for anybody?
Fair enough. And I appreciate the comment, and now I'm even happier that I mixed about 15 slides from this earlier today, and we're showing even more photographs. So we can skip through the first few. Then maybe I think there is a photograph of the actual conditions on the ground today, which we can move to. You can see it there. These are just from different perspectives from around the building. There we go. So this one, I think there's one following this. This, of course, shows behind the tree, and it's most visible. So, and I'm going to do my best to describe this. Certainly, the architect can answer additional questions you have because Chris knows this better than I do. But my understanding is that so there's a variety of equipment that was proposed from the outset to be located on the roof of the proposed addition. Some of that equipment is actually quite a bit smaller than it was anticipated to be, was shown on the earlier plans. For example, elevator overrun was shown to be approximately 3 feet above the roof parapet and is actually only 6 inches above the roof parapet. So there are some components of the mechanical equipment on the rooftop that are better than we had envisioned. But this is not. This is much taller than envisioned and bulkier than envisioned. My understanding of the source of that is that originally it was proposed to be 8 feet 6 inches and approximately 6 feet above the parapet. What it ultimately was constructed to be is 10 feet 10 inches. And there's essentially 3 reasons for that. One is what I'm going to refer to as the surge tank, and you'll see in one of the future options. There's relocation of that surge tank, but the surge tank is that sort of rectangular piece on top of the rectangular piece on the right side there that adds additional height. And is also rather unsightly. That surge tank is essentially an expansion tank for the radiator. It is a required component according to the manufacturer, but that is not something that was anticipated. Additionally, there's a requirement of a curbing, 21 inches of curbing. And I wasn't quite sure what was meant by that because this is not my area of expertise, but I spoke with the architect and he explained to me that essentially it's sort of a structural component beneath the actual radiator itself that provides support. Exactly, that it sits on, right? And it serves multiple purposes. One of which there's a motor at the bottom of the generator, the radiator, and you need to provide sufficient clearance beneath the actual radiator that serves that purpose. It also provides sufficient clearance for snow and wind and things of that sort. So that's a 21-inch curve required by the manufacturer for all those purposes. And then of course there's vibration isolators as well that add additional height to it beneath the radiator as well in that same area where the curbing is located. Add all that together, you get the additional 28 inches in total from what we anticipated the final constructed condition would be. So that's the existing condition. Let's talk about some of the solutions that we're proposing. So the first is a simple solution, and in fact, it's also built into some of the later solutions. It's just referred to as a surge tank relocation. I will be candid, I will be honest, I don't think it makes a significant aesthetic difference, but it does constitute an improvement. And we're going to show it a couple of ways, one through these illustrations, and then we also have a tangram overlay onto an existing photograph. So you can see there that rectangular surge tank, the piece on top, was simply shifted from the front facing State Street to the back. Again, I'm not going to tell you it makes a significant difference, but it is an improvement and it's been incorporated into some of the other changes as well. So you can see it from different angles around the building. So then we have an option for an extended parapet. There's actually a couple of different options here, depending upon the appropriate height of an extended parapet. In both of these options, we have included the relocated surge tank. So the surge tank is always relocated to the rear because we do think it makes a improvement. But this first proposal is for a 30-inch extension on the parapet surrounding the addition. So again, as you get closer to it, you can see it better. This is probably the best example, and there is a tangram photograph of this as well. So you can see that where we've got the existing parapet wall, the project engineer, Chris Angelakis, did explain to me that based upon the design of the structure, it's a bit deceiving. The actual roof structure itself is not immediately behind the trim, just above the sill of the window, or the top of the window. It's actually a bit higher. The parapet wall it sort of gives you a false sense of where the top of the building is. But this extends that parapet wall 30 inches more. Doesn't cover, of course, the entirety of the height of the radiator, but does provide at least some cover for the bottom portion of that radiator. So you can see it there, and you can see it in the ensuing pictometry from various locations surrounding the building. This is from Garden Street, and this is the tangram photograph that I was referring to that gives you a sense of what it will actually look like. If you zoom in a bit on that area, if you could, Andy, you'll see that it's just simply an extension of the existing parapet. There is a bit of a seam that runs across the top there to provide for the extension. This is a relatively, easy for me to say, but a relatively simple extension. The next iteration or next option I'm going to show you is going to be a further extended parapet wall that would actually require some structural modifications to the wall. This would not require those significant structural changes. This is the third option, which is an extended parapet that would be 40 inches. So quite a bit higher, but also providing a greater screen or buffer around the building. Again, you can still see components of the radiator. You can still see the referenced surge tank. but it is higher and therefore covers much more of the structure. And again, these are from Otis Place and from Garden Street, and this is the Tangram photograph showing you that coverage as well. So again, not entirely enclosing it or covering it, but providing that screen. So these were, I mean, there's only so much you can do with respect to the existing building and the radiator being in the location that it's in. So we tried to think outside the box. We said, can we relocate this to another portion of the building? We obviously need to stay away from the historic 1800s building, but we do have that addition that was built in the 1980s that now connects the 1800s building to the addition. We had to do some structural testing to be sure that the ceiling structure itself could support weight. The good news is that the structural tests came back and confirmed it could. And so you can see here in the fourth option, an option that we think probably provides the best aesthetic improvement. What we would be doing is we would be relocating in its entirety. This is not without its complications or risks. My understanding is that a crane needs to be brought on site due to the bulk and the weight of the existing radiator. It needs to be moved from the roof of the addition, brought to the ground, probably in the area of the parking lot or the drive-through you're looking at here, placed on the ground. The crane then needs to be relocated so that it can be lifted again on the crane and moved over to the building. You can't simply do it in one swing, because in so doing, you will wipe out the tree that is also important and right in the middle of the drive-through area. So it's not without its complications, but we understand that it can be done. You can see that there's an extension of the stucco wall that is currently at the top. You'll see it better in the Tangram photographs, but that's currently at the top of the 80s addition. It'll be extended to be consistent in terms of aesthetic. See this from the different locations. That just shows you where it's be located within the 80s structure right there, correct? Currently, it's over on the left side, to the left of the other boxes, a little further, right about there. So that's where we're moving to. And then you can see here, when I refer to that stucco wall, there's that horizontal stucco piece that runs along the top of the awning, the glass awning. And if you look behind that, you can see that there is a raised new stucco piece that is overlaid right there. That would be enclosing the radiator. It would enclose the radiator essentially on three sides. And the additional height of the new addition would operate to enclose the radiator on the fourth side. It would essentially be entirely enclosed, obviously providing sufficient space around it to meet with manufacturer specifications. But you can see that because of the lower height of this roof, that it obscures not the entirety of, but most of what is the height of the radiator. I think there's one more at the very end, maybe in final. This is just a different perspective, different view. And so again, we're before you with a bit of a different request than what we had made in our initial correspondence, and we did supplement that correspondence with a second letter that we sent a week ago, indicating that we, through discussions again with the city, that we had made we'd done some further exploration and made some adjustments. And we're coming forth with some different proposals. So we hope that the board will consider these. We're happy to discuss them further with you, answer any questions you might have about them. To the extent that they relate back to the permitting of the project, I'm happy to answer those questions. To the extent that they're specific to the design or relocation of the practicalities of that, I may defer to Chris. Thank you.
Any questions?
In your analysis, did you consider placing the radiator with a different silhouette radiator?
I did. Yeah. We actually went back to the manufacturer and talked about a number of different options, including motor relocation of the, if we could, because the height has been being driven from the manufacturer side by the motor. We talked about a number of components, one of them being another model of radiator. That model of radiator would have been not lower enough to offset the amount of structural modification of the existing building if what had been done to make that work, because the footprint would be much bigger if it's lower. So it's instead of a single fan, it's an array of fans. So the footprint was actually quite large, to the point where the structural capacity that roof is, can give you details about what the roof structure is. Roof structure is not rigorous, it's not as over designed, let's say, as the 80s edition was. So there's not built-in capacity to just add, let's wait to the new edition. So we had to eliminate that option because the building would not take that. It's a much heavier unit.
Well, it shouldn't be in theory.
I'm sorry?
You know, if you went to a low silhouette, albeit larger footprint, you're still in the same amount of heat rejection.
It's
Provide the
it's
same
6 fans versus 1. So
but they're smaller, right? So, if you were to be constrained by the height as you were when you built it, you would have gone to a low silhouette radiator.
So I have to give you a little bit more history. We did not choose this piece of equipment. The generator manufacturer proposes these solutions. We don't have, it's not part of the, it's not necessarily part of the HVAC or electrical engineering specifications. They have performance requirements, specifications that then the generator manufacturer uses to size and then propose equipment. We had proposed as far as the conceptual design, where this radiator was going to be and how big it was, and we defined an envelope. It's back when we were before the board in the initial submission. As we were talking to the manufacturer, their proposal to us for what the radiator size was going to fit inside of that. Adam told you exactly what those numbers were going to be. And then Adam also enumerated what the prices were when the thing came. It did not match what was submitted to us. Components of it were taller than what was explained to the design team. Was that, well, this is what we do. It's a custom piece of equipment that comes the way we built it. And so very difficult to, so going back to your question, I didn't sit with a catalog and choose a piece of equipment. We discussed with Milton Cat and their original, the original equipment manufacturer, who again, subcontractor of Cat, to say, okay, we believe we're fitting inside the envelope that we showed the planning board. And that did not end up being true. So now we're here and trying to find solutions. So the answer is yes. After the fact, we said to the manufacturer, okay, go show us options. I think they had one other option is the array. The array was the only option they could show. And it is, I don't want to repeat myself, it is bigger and it was heavier. And also just the amount of footprint we would have to modify structure. We did not have capacity to add that roof structure to take that. So we backed off of that option, and I will say again, the amount of height it came down was other of these solutions were going to have to also come into play too. It wasn't, we did not feel it was short enough to really make a significant difference. It's not short, it's just shorter.
So essentially, we'd be having the same conversation even with that.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true. However, we have to make value judgments of what we're showing you based on.
So
that's all of.
So I appreciate your discussion of how you ended up here. What I will say though is that oversight, we'll call it for better. There's a miscommunications between the manufacturer. I worked with them for 10 years. That's actually not the way it works. Milton Cat is not constrained. They don't make radiators. They buy
them. They go to EAI or whoever.
They go to a whole bunch of different ones, and you can get one any shape and size that you need. You can even get.
And they did not propose them to.
They didn't because they obviously sold you one. They don't want to take it back.
They didn't.
Right, if they provide.
I guess I'm not. Okay.
Well, let me finish my line. You can disagree with it if you like. So what I'm suggesting is Now you're in this, you're in this angle where you're stuck with something and you're trying to make it move. And I'm suggesting that you step back in the design of it, 3 steps back. There is a way to do it, and I'm convinced of that.
When was that moment?
The moment you ordered and released that radiator.
The moment Milton Cat ordered and released that.
Yeah, but he works for you. I mean, he's not an independent, right? So someone said, yes, Milton Cap, that's what we're looking for. Unless you have a performance spec that says they were supposed to make all of the requirements whole. And then your issues with that. It's not with the residents of Newbury.
I would not say that.
So that's what I'm saying. So what I'm asking you is, did you step back enough to look at the options from not just the manufacturers that Milton Cat can point to,
so
and then see if there's one available that would meet the requirement to leave it where it is?
I'm going to go back to the process. If we set an envelope, that piece of equipment was going to exist with it, and we came to the planning board, and we said, this is the expected envelope, and the planning board said, we're good with that. And then we moved forward with design, and we looked at the piece of equipment that was being proposed by Milton Cat. We said, that fits the envelope. And then at construction, the thing that showed up, components that didn't match the expectations. Now, this is where we are. This is why we are. Because this thing now falls outside of the agreed envelope that we all saw.
True, again. Yep.
Okay, so that's why I asked, when was that moment? So the moment that we knew that we were outside the envelope was the moment it was put onto the roof. Because otherwise, if all the components were as expected, it would fit within the envelope.
There's a contract you're missing. There's a continuity of an approval of a shop drawing.
We got the shop drawing.
And you approved it, and the dimensions are on there. So yeah, honestly, we're here where we are. I get that. But what I'm suggesting is, in your alternatives, there is an alternative to select another radiator.
And we exercised a study of that alternative. But that alternative
Can you provide that evaluation to us?
Sure.
Okay.
We looked at another piece of equipment. We had structural engineers look at it based on what the roof structure is. And this was, I appreciate where you're going at. We went through the same set of questions. I think the idea is good. We thought the idea. Until there's a cascading set of circumstances changing to putting another piece of equipment, which doesn't sit on the structural points that we designed for this one. It doesn't sit on. It's much bigger.
Of the one you looked at. And I guess what I'm suggesting is if you submit it to us, that would be we can't relitigate what happened. It's not really our affair. But I would like to see the option we just discussed.
But we can submit. I mean, we're happy. As I said before, we've got nothing to hide in terms of the due diligence we've done in the past several weeks or months.
Yeah, it's not easy. I get it. Right. Believe me, I get it. We all don't want to be here looking at this. Right? We wish it would have gone a different way. But I for me personally, I just can't overlook it. Right? I can't walk out of town and look up and say, well, it was just a miscommunications between a supplier and it's just there. So that's what I'm hoping. And then if it's impossible, right? We're not impossible people. We're just trying to.
Sure. And I just want to be clear about what we're presenting to the board, right? Because the standard is not impossible. The standard is we are submitting a request for an amendment. You review that amendment with reasonableness, determining whether it's appropriate and whether it continues to be consistent with the purposes and intent of your zoning ordinance and the standards upon which you made findings when you issued site plan approval. What we presented to you was not that option. Maybe, again, we can agree to disagree as to whether that option even exists. We're telling you that based upon where we were directed and the option, the alternative, the single alternative in terms of a different piece of equipment that we evaluated, it was not a viable solution. Your position, I think, is that, well, maybe there were some other viable solutions, some other types of equipment that would have been available. All I'm saying to you is that we're not presenting that as an option. If the board's consensus is you don't like any of these, you're not going to approve any of these, Well, I suppose then we have an option. We can tell you to deny us and we can litigate that issue. Or we can say, okay, we'll come back again and we'll bring you 1, 2, 3, 4 more options. But I can tell you that we looked at those other options, and if we thought there were other options that were reasonable, that were viable, both from an engineering perspective and candidly financially as well, not that any of these, particularly not the relocation option, is inexpensive, that we would have presented those two. We didn't come with 4 because we thought it was the magic number. We came with 4 because these are sort of the options we thought were best suited.
Understood. Yeah, I guess specifications on the one alternative would be preferred, or the exact specifications of that potential component. And what is the height difference per se?
So, I actually like the relocation option. I think it's an elegant option. At least in Tanger's illustration. And I'm not sure, if it were possible to go back and look at another option that didn't raise the screening wall, and was feasible, economically feasible, and structurally feasible. I'd be willing to look at that. I just don't think either option 1, 2, or 3 does much for me, because it still leaves the raising of the screening wall, the extension of the screening wall isn't very elegant the way it just kind of adds bulk to an already bulky area. And I think that actually relocation kind of spreads out the roof line and makes it nicer. So I think I'm very comfortable.
And I do want to be clear, if I could, I don't have the specifications of the alternative. I'm also hearing if the alternative couldn't be today on the roof of the new addition. But even if it could, I don't have the specifications. Even the approved or the conceptually approved radiator was going to be 8 feet 6 inches or 6 feet above the parapet. So I think there's something to be said for comparing what this would look like, understanding that what we're seeing today is far more obtrusive. It wouldn't be unobtrusive if it were only 6 feet above the parapet. I think that this alternative 4, which by the way is the most expensive of the 4 options, but I think that this option 4 does the best job sort of hiding the radiator.
And I think it also just softens the difference in building height between the 1980s edition and the new edition. So I think it actually improves the architecture.
I was not part of the entire process of approval. I joined the board when it came back to the board from mediation and land court, all of that history. But what I understood from comments from the neighborhood that one of the significant points of concern was building height. And one of the reasons why the agreement with the board ultimately had very definitive dimensions and description of building height because of the concerns of the neighborhood and because we wanted to understand ultimately what the finished product would look like. Because of what happened with the radiators, there is a significant violation of that agreement. Violation is probably too strong a word, but it's non-compliant with wider agreement. But I don't think that adding height to the building around it is consistent with the spirit of the original agreement. Since there was such sensitivity to building height, I don't think making the building taller around something that's not really is in the spirit of what that basic agreement. I would agree with Rick that for a variety of reasons, I think the relocation and mitigating all of those circumstances that way is the preferred solution. But we did ask that question in one of our original meetings. I know there's a much longer description of the roof structure. It's a pretty lightweight steel structure, and there are complications related to that. But I think your question is worth just to see what the reality of that is in terms of the equipment. Because because this is all custom. It can be any configuration, generalizing a little bit, but it's like, I think it's worth following up and responding to. Any other questions?
So to follow up, if we were to, we would still need to come back because this is a view, there's no plan.
Yeah, I think, maybe to speak to that point, I think it's quite obvious that there's a potential this discussion resolved because there isn't any work in act on tonight sufficient to clarify what's being done. We have some renderings of that. I think it's clear enough for the board to be looking for detailed, elevations to go with this to clarify that. There was some discussion about whether the drawings were going to show exactly the glass area there, but at the end of the day, I think the board obviously is going to need here clear, coherent dimension drawings to show what this is going to look like at the end of the day for the rendering where we went up on this. Presumably that would be coming.
Building elevations, building sections, roof plan, just enough information that those documents could be attached to an eventual agreement, and they're very specific as to what we're. So it's basically contract document level information.
Sure. So the only question that I would have for the board is I'm getting sort of somewhat mixed messages from members, right? That there are some who have an interest in getting additional information on the due diligence we've done with respect to an alternative form of regulator. That would lead down a different path, not a path that we would necessarily voluntarily go down, but we are willing to present the information. But I'm also hearing that you would need line drawings, elevations, and sections and such. But had this gone in the direction of a general consensus that this was a preferred solution, I was prepared to ask that be a condition of approval. We can prepare those and provide them to the board. What I don't want to do is incur that cost and expense and head down that path if we're going to come back and the consensus is going to be no, we're going to insist upon a different kind of behavior.
Yep.
If I could, just briefly, I guess I just, from the discussion I've seen, and I was here for that entire process. There's two things I feel like it just state. One is I do think, it's unfortunate for, the bank's perspective that this moved essentially, but I think that's probably the right solution here from a mass placement perspective, given where the original permitting was, where this equipment is effectively today. The other thing I do feel like it's perhaps worthy of note with the polls for something that Brian was saying earlier. We do project management in the city as well, and we have contracts we see from the design phase all the way through to construction. So it's quite obvious, I think, to Brian's point. And I don't want to, labor the point or go back down, rabbit hole of what options are there so much in the past, as much as fixing what is there today and resolving this so that you can get your occupancy permit, the issue of the roof can be resolved, passing it and so forth. But I think it's really important for the neighborhood, where have to be here for the bank, frankly. Obviously, a ball got dropped somewhere between the original design and what's happening between the specifications, because the specifications going out to a vendor, which are essentially owned entirely by the owner, who was the architect, who's overseeing subs and so forth. There's still an ownership over that piece of it. So, in essence, the specification that the city was doing this project would be to say, we need you to do all the specifications for that heating equipment to run, but we also need to make sure it stays within this constraint, this spatial constraint. And that's the piece that I feel that it seems quite obvious to me was not unfortunately translated through to the actual construction side. And irrespective of the discussion about bringing something or showing something later on, somewhere along the way, the folks are involved in that process, on that piece of it. So it's unfortunate that we are where we are, but I do think the faster track that gets to your question, that if the one that's moving it is the one that makes the most sense overall, it would make more sense to focus on that we're not giving the right direction to that piece of it and be able to sort of close that loop per se based on everything we've seen, rather than going around a bunch of scenarios that may not actually be viable at the end of the day. Anyway, just my 2 cents based on everything that I've seen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It also sounds like no matter what, even if we went with an alternative option, it would still have to be relocated based on what they're saying. It wouldn't be able to mass on that. So we'd still be back to option 4, even if it was a completely different assembly. I think
that what I'm hearing is there isn't a lot of preference for raising the parapet thing around the alternatives we consider going forward are relocation and redesign of the unit remaining in its existing.
I would support the relocation.
Just, we had public comment.
No, I was just.
Okay. I have no comments about the
Do you have
other.
any other question? I'd like to open it up for public comment, anyone would love to come forward? State your name and address and, get your comments to.
Peter Mackin, I'm at 11 and 13 Prospect Street, which is directly across from the new addition. I would just say that, first of all, I'd like to compliment the bank on their snow removal. This has been a tough week, and I'll tell you, they did a great job. The next morning, their people were able to walk on the sidewalk. The following morning, people were able to park on that side. So, good job there. But with regard to this project, obviously you know from their history that the neighbors were very disappointed with the size, the height, the mass. We're still disappointed. But there's not a lot we could do with it. We were disappointed with the process, okay? And the way it was entailed, and the fact that we didn't hear the decision for 6 months after the decision. So that was the things that we were disappointed. On this particular element of the height of the building and the unit, I have two concerns, or had two concerns. One's been sort of eliminated, but one was noise. I'd just like some assurance that when it's all said and done, new radiator, internal generator, that the noise isn't anything close to what it used to be, okay? Because it was horrible. That's the primary one. The second one that we have on our side of the street, which would be 9, 11, and 13, is the amount of light. We've lost, I know they went through diagrams, they showed where the sun's going to be and so forth, but our first floor is in the shade all day in the winter, okay? If I'm upstairs, sitting in my office or a bedroom, it's very light, very bright, it's a beautiful day. I come down to the first floor, it's in the shade all winter, okay? I haven't seen the summer really, how it's going to impact that, but that's a big disappointment because it wasn't described to be that. This is a huge building, and sun hasn't changed the way it goes. So that's all I have to say. I want to thank you for your time. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Peter McNamee from 9 Otis Place. And everything that Andy Port said, I could repeat, but I won't. It was very well said. So I'd like to just sort of bookmark that and say that the whole chain of ownership and the supporting the ultimate design of the building is important, and it stays with the owner. So when a manufacturer delivers something that's not on a middles, that's the manufacturer's problem to fix. Having said that, looking at these proposals, I appreciate the time that went into coming up with solutions. I appreciate options 1, 2, and 3, and push them aside. If there is going to be a solution, it would be option 4, the relocation, in my mind. For years, walking down the street, looking at the result of whatever happened with the library, a beautiful building, beautifully designed, with that atrocity of mechanical equipment sticking up like a sore thumb. In my mind, that's the owner's, that's the architect's responsibility to let the design, the integrity of the design, outlast the actual construction. So I strongly recommend getting behind whatever is going to reduce any interruption to that. Thank you.
Any other comment? We'll close public comment. Any further discussion?
Well, I was just holding for a comment. I agree. I think I agree with Rick and the last fellow who spoke. This proposed relocation is head and shoulders above the other three options. But I do respect my colleagues here desire to see the other option, which is just a different piece of equipment as well. So the only good news I think for the applicant tonight is I would agree, and I'm just one member of the board, but I would agree you can scrap options 1 through 3 as well. I don't think those are worth pursuing at all. So if we're talking about drawings that describe this better, and that can be done parallel perhaps with that effort, I would support that, but I guess that's the applicant's decision whether or not to do that, but that's the direction I would encourage.
And I would just add, I know there's some concern about another option that wasn't in consideration. I would view it as we're trying to make a whole record, right? We're trying to figure out where we are today, what was evaluated, and what drove us to the decision. Decision is I'm not asking you to do any more work other than maybe do a few more things. And I think you said you would already evaluate it and just make the record complete. And then if you, as the applicant, don't feel like you want to pursue that option, that's your right. Right? It's not like we're going to force you to do anything. I just like to know if someone comes and asks me 2 years from now what happened, I'll say we completely evaluated it. We understood what the options were. We understood the condition, and it's in the file for the board. Right?
So is your request really just for documentation, or are we leaving it open to us?
No, but I saw the reaction, right? It's not an option. We evaluated it, it's not an option. And I'm just suggesting that we could take time to look at that evaluation and say, was it an option? We, as a group, are sticklers when it comes to someone saying, we looked at it, and it's not an option, and we say, okay, submit it.
So again, but it's still clarify
No,
whether you want to leave 2 options open for the next meeting, or whether is that?
I would want to keep it open until I saw it.
Okay, so we wouldn't be giving direction at this point, as to a particular direction we want to.
Yeah, so I guess just to summarize what you said, to make sure we're on the same sheet of music, what I'm suggesting is if you evaluated it and there's a low silhouette option, leave all the plumbing there, all the electrical there, and just swap out the equipment, and it goes below in conformance with what you had originally gotten approved. I'd like to see that option. You don't have to relocate. You don't need 2 cranes. You don't need to interrupt the whole neighborhood. That's construction. You're going to have to plumb it. You're going to have to bring electrical. It's not insignificant. And I think that's a least, even swapping out the radiator might be a least cost option.
And I would just say to the chair, if I could, that I'm confident, and I think Chris is confident, that we're not going to be able to present that option to you, right? There is no option that would allow us to simply swap out the existing radiator with a different lower profile radiator. Number one, because most importantly, we couldn't place it there because the roof structure wouldn't support it. Number two, to the extent that it's lowering the height, it's not lowering it in a significant sense. Now all you're doing is you're taking the lower height and you're increasing the massing because the footprint is larger. But again, we have no objection to showing this any of this to you. We actually had this presentation of 55 or 60 slides. It was at one point closer to 100 slides. And we had a chart that was in about size 10 font that you probably couldn't read that showed you all the options we evaluated. We decided that we didn't want this presentation to be 2 hours long and to get into details and options that we determined for ourselves we weren't even going to propose to you because we weren't prepared to pursue them. This was one of those options, but I think it's a reasonable request to say we'd like to see the paperwork. We'd like to understand how you evaluated that option. We'll present that paperwork. I think we're also comfortable simultaneously. I wasn't so comfortable 10 or 15 minutes ago, but as the board has talked it through, simultaneously preparing and presenting to you the line drawings for the option you see on the screen. And the reason for that is because I'm confident enough that even if we're going to simultaneously present you with the alternative radiator option, I'm confident we're going to tell you at the same time that we're not prepared to present that as an option that we're willing to undertake for all sorts of reasons. Number one, because physically we don't believe from an engineering perspective it can be done. Second of all, we're not going to get our money back for the radiator that's currently been purchased and that is installed on the building. So that's a significant cost for the bank to now purchase a second radiator. But again, it can't be done, can't be placed in this location. I don't know that we've investigated placing a, lower profile radiator on the eighties building, but again, that's gonna be an additional cost because we're not gonna recoup the cost of the radiator we already paid for. And I think you can see from the graphic that's on the screen right now, we are able to disguise the existing radiator on the eighties building in a manner that is not obtrusive. From my perspective, maybe you differ, but I don't find that to be obtrusive. I find that to be far less obtrusive, quite candidly, than even the original radiator proposal for the new structure that was going to be 6 feet above the parapet.
So I'm okay with you coming back as you described with detailed drawings for relocation onto the 1980, as well as information related to the new, present that as a viable alternative. I think if you all agree, I think we should continue on that.
Can I just for the applicant and before just look at the point that makes sense. Is it feasible for you to return versus, when does it make sense before recognizing that the 18th, we have some other stuff I don't actually take it up that night. That's a short turnaround for you.
Especially because you have to have a weekend.
And we, especially if you have
Next week.
which is definitely realistic.
I think it's gonna have to be. I'm sure, my client's not happy and I don't blame them. As you probably all know, there is no CO that has been issued for this edition yet, and yet it is ready to go. And my understanding is won't be until such time as we get the approval. So we'd like to keep the process moving along, but I can't create plans faster than my architect can draft them. So,
So is it feasible to do it last week, to get the plans in the last week in February? Do you have to for the meeting of the fourth?
The fourth is your subsequent meeting.
Yeah.
So the deadline would be a week prior, which would be 3 weeks from right there. Yeah. That nod looks to me like. Because this isn't just putting lines on paper, you want us to engineer this out. It's final, ready to go. Push the button, so that takes, the lines are easy to draw. It's the engineering that needs to be checked, double checked. We need to go through plumbing, electrical, structural.
Those are I think the board just needs to be able to see the exteriors and be able to rely upon those details.
Yeah, I think we can easily get that part done by the fourth of the
But just a word of caution. If you're not complete with the engineering, you have to have certainty about dimensions and layout. Because I don't want to hear later on that we went through the engineering and we have to change this. So just be certain about what you're doing. We don't need all the engineering information that's inside of the building. We need to understand the impact from an exterior point of view. You need it.
Or that you can make it smaller.
So with that, we would request a continuance to your March 4th meeting.
So we would continue looking at all.
Yeah. So I move that we move to continue the special permit amendment for 93 State Street to March 4th.
I second. Roll call vote again. Brian?
Yes.
Walden?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Jack Lecaire?
Yes.
Matt Heffron?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So
Thank you, appreciate your time today.
Well,
Okay, we have general business, couple of items, 185 Low Street, approval not required.
Yeah, I'm not sure, do we, you want to speak to this?
I'm gonna say.
Okay, that's quite all right. No, you're more than happy to. You're welcome to. Just in brief, I think the board might actually be aware of where the Georges is coming from. I'm not going to speak to it, but these are relatively straightforward plans that the planning board gets. It really comes down to whether or not the lots that are being proposed, in this case, this is on Low Street right here. We have Old Park Lane. I don't know if anybody on the board right now, we're going to see every time the project development's up. But at any rate, when that project is being approved, there's other homes back here, right, that were built by Daley. And there was a discussion the last year or so, roughly, about a zoning change for this area. Recognize there might be some ability to fit a few more homes, and one of the areas that was incorporated within that zoning change is affected this lot. And so there's the ability to essentially carve this larger lot into two lots, creating another house lot here. And so in this case, the approval not required plan under the subdivision control law is limited to really just down to one thing primarily, which is there enough frontage and access to get the lot proposed? In this case, there is. There's also the 80% of the frontage square shown there. So essentially a viable lot under zoning. There's no reason the office would recommend endorsement as typical. There's no reason the subdivision control law that we pretty straightforward, I would say. These are
Any questions?
That'd be wrong.
I have. Second.
Move to endorse the A and R plan for 185 Low Street.
Second. We got a vote again. Brian,
I'm sorry, who?
voting.
Voted.
Yes.
Alden?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Jack McCarron?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
You're a yes, I'm a yes. We endorse the.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You can touch base with us tomorrow on the bylaw. I'll have to sign that physically, and then we can get that to you. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay, 13 Hill Street, application for completeness.
So I don't know that we were expecting the applicant to be here and talking with Caitlin earlier today. In essence, this is actually something that's played more recently for a totally different property, but this is the back of one of the religious properties on Hill Street. There's two religious properties there. This isn't showing the whole context, of course, but at the back of the property, very similar to what you saw below, there's a desire for a back storage, facility essentially back there. So in essence, it's similar configuration, meaning using a back portion of the lot. And so it's kind of similar considerations, not the sort of architectural design certainly better in a lot of other instances, but check with the fire department for access and such. But basically, I should have proposed to put the equipment in the back here. The question was just whether they did also submit with that list of requested waivers or something that these are necessary. Pretty low situation as well. So we usually try to do the usual, just taking the department's concerns, there are issues with wetlands, get access to their safety, and the usual issues that you might question about yourself, but have any relationship with the site or otherwise.
Just one question, one of the materials this one was a previously approved site plan for an expansion. Is that expired? I didn't see what date it was.
Yeah, I believe we're saying that's a we can circle back to them. Actually, it's related to a discussion. Else because a couple of applications like this, but sometimes we see materials uploaded and confusing either where they place it or whether the plan is relevant. In this case, we have several versions of plans, and they're not all relevant or right in this context. And I think you're right about that. I think we could start with that piece of that. But yes, it's unfortunately this case we should probably clean cut existing conditions where we're starting from. Mixing the record with something that might be something that
were these approved or were they just in their files and they dumped them up in our files?
that I did not research myself. We need to go looking into that record. Essentially, from my perspective, the only plans that are, whether they're the existing conditions and the proposed. So I'd have to look at that in further detail with the office records. And he said to be the only baseline that exists.
Is there, not that makes it really much difference, is there a way for the office to remove inappropriate information?
So for this, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, this.
Yeah, sorry, just, this is one of those idiosyncrasies. It actually goes to something else. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but in the case of, the Institution for Savings, actually, I noticed labor, which I sort of back to the staff, the applicant, but you may have noticed in that case, some applicant materials were uploaded in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
Or not the right, and you may have noticed that, you probably did. And so to me, it's like, all right, well, talk to staff, because I want staff to flag for an applicant when they put something like, with the open gov system, we can't stop people from uploading a file spot, but we can either manually go and move something to the right place, or correct it, or have that, or advise that they need to be corrected because the issue is not going to be resolved, or we're not going to advance the stuff until they fix it. Sometimes we get a document uploaded like a plan of wrong orientation. It's disrespectful to the board to give a plan that's upside down. You shouldn't have to rotate it for Adobe to rotate your PDF pages, right? So, at any rate, there's a few things like that. In this case, I think unfortunately that muddied the waters a bit unnecessarily. I think in this case, yes, we can go a bit. The only thing I can say can't really be doing, or should be doing, is removing, generally speaking, removing from the record something that was entered in there because it's part of the health record. I think here it'd be more likely to sort of clarifying or correcting what is relevant in the record and what is intended per se. We do try to address that issue, but unfortunately sometimes an applicant might upload something, and so we don't necessarily want to subtract from the public record without it can become the public record per se. But I 100% agree with you. It's unnecessary to have multiple plans and really, information that might be.
Because we have, when we do the decision, we can list all the plans that we received.
That's correct. However, and to your point, I guess, in the context of something like this is something that we wrestle, and I only have so much time in the day to work this part of great detail like this, but we try to make sure essentially in the written decision that what we're referencing is the actual relevant approved plans and so forth. So while there might be still a record or even documents, we're trying to make it very clear in the references there and then further on the conditions that there's only one set of plans we're referring to. For instance, so in the case of like Kmart, for instance, the ZBA had they had 107 or 114 attachments at the end of the day. Everything's listed in the ZBA decision, but there's only one final set of plans. We actually went through the trouble of listing by date each drawing sheet because they have revision dates. Yeah. So in this case, to your point, that's exactly what we're looking for here. I think in any sort of written decision for this or other situations, we do actively try to work with applicants, despite a little bit sort of cross between applicants, staff, and partly here, but look into it further. But the idea being that yes, there should be one clear coherent set of plans and not a mishmash of things that might use the record, so yeah. So anyway, I guess the general question here was just, do you have the materials you need to look at this? As you did the last time around, when you sort of said, we need in the case of 21.3 low to look at that storage facility. In this case, they gave some other material.
Yeah, I think that those the same waivers for the grants.
Yeah, I know in the office, we should look at
the two action items. One is the waiver, we should vote on, and then. Anyone have any other comment? Motion about the waivers.
Move to grant the requested waivers of the requirements found in section 15E as requested by the applicant.
Second. All those in favor, go around the room. Brian?
Yes.
Holden?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Jack?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
I'm also a yes. Now motion related to.
We move to determine the application for the site plan review for 13 Hale Street as complete, including waiver of the aforementioned submittal requirements.
And roll call vote. Brian?
Yes.
Holden?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Jack?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks as always.
Requested waivers are approved and site plan completed.
Okay, yeah.
On to approval of minutes, which is an easy one because.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You'll
That's
have,
actually probably. We okay.
John, it's not your fault, I don't always be listening to them.
So we'll push
You'll have it next time.
those approvals off. Annual election of I've had a conversation with who doesn't feel he can continue in the vice chair role. So we can do one of two things. We can establish candidates tonight, vote on it, or we can next meeting and allow you all to think about whether you want to do a vice chair. Do you have any thoughts? Alden, I should ask you if you're number one. Are you at the
I'm here for the next meeting.
You're here?
I'm not here for
You're
the
not.
meeting, I'm at the.
Are you?
What's your order?
Continuing?
That's fine, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Does someone have an interest in being the vice chair?
No.
I mean, I'll say the same thing I said when Bob changed over from Rick. In fairness to Charlie, I would. If he doesn't want to, we don't want to hold anybody.
I think he feels that he doesn't have the time to commit to it and just doesn't feel he's doing justice to the position. So
He's very hard on himself,
anyway,
so I would consider it if he wants to bow out and no one else wants to.
Well,
Yeah.
we can get this out of the way tonight. But I'm okay with continuing as well.
Fine, John.
Could we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the Alden as secretary, Mr. Cook as chairman, and Brian as vice chair.
Second.
All those in favor? One more time. Right.
Yes.
All,
yes.
Jamie. Jack?
I can barely hear you, but yes.
Trust me, it'll be okay.
Yes.
And I'm a yes.
Congratulations.
We're seeing all your ball.
I question your judgment in personnel now. You pick me, you gotta think twice.
So we're at the other update.
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of things. I want to have a short meeting, but I can also talk about facility, lots of planning and development stuff. So one thing is I did talk to a few folks already. If the folks who are involved in the committee for the story after the book and stay for just a few minutes right after the meeting, just to confer on a couple of times starting next week, we can meet with the consultant. I can close the loop with the contract tomorrow. The city council will roll into the process with us. We'll attend some of our meetings here, but we'll also be asked, I haven't got the new configuration of which councilors, but meeting with us or some of the daytime meetings with the consultant. And then I've also reached out to, we'll close it tomorrow on the housing trust to see if we can have a member with the housing trust also. But at any rate, to pick up that's on the Low Street and the story. There are three other zoning things I think are worth mentioning in terms of timing. One is the ADU amendment. I pushed out the most recent version of that that's coming out of the council on Monday night. Gotta get them back for if you want. I did try to provide a brief synopsis of it, but in essence, we're at the planning board left off providing a recommendation for adoption last year. The city council was running out of time frame in which to act upon it because legal counsel, although that discussion, those who were there, we were all waiting for legal counsel to try to give guidance on the non-conformances, and other details in some of this new area. And unfortunately, they didn't fill that gap at all. Unfortunately, never really came back and help. I've, putting all that aside, new legal counsel, which is expected to be appointed by the city council as a formality sort of in the coming days, was able to get on board with us quickly to at least try to help out with this process, recognizing where the ball might have been dropped by others. And so that process, might have been done a little faster track, closing up last year for one reason or another. I think we had a really good discussion last night. Rick, I think you were the first but you were there. Thank you for coming up. We had another meeting as usual. But we talked about the accessory dwelling units amendment, and in essence, I can unpack further, but in my view, at least, you can tell your end. I think after putting aside all the details and all the debate and so forth, I do think at least it's brand landed in a good situation. I think in a good place, by balance, recognizing a lot of different factors and still known about case law. I do think that the proposed amendment as it is right now is, I think, is close as possible as comporting with the regulations and the statutes and all that. And the intent, well, also, I would say properly, balancing that against the sort of character spatial constraints that zoning, might normally conflict. And so I think, in essence, you can have an ADU and it could be closer to a lot line, but it's also adhere to the smaller sizes of the concept. And in essence, the regulations would allow reuse of existing non-conforming structures. It could be modified, or, within reason to meet building, state codes. It can be adaptively reused. If someone wants to expand or extend it, then you're before the board. So typical like other structures and uses and things like that. Handling it, responsible, and then I think it's, jumping with the intent of legislation, all that. There's a lot of little details, and I think we can talk about, agree, disagree on the spectrum. But I do think it's come to a pretty decent place overall. There's still discuss there. That was their primary debate. That was their Monday closed. The alternative was to restart the clock again, have another joint public hearing review, and essentially with new members of the council, we bring our see here, hopefully pick up where we left off, but possibly go back to the start, again, and say start the whole discussion. Which to me is, Let me know if you have any questions on that front there. I don't really want to add.
It's just a process. I didn't like the process.
Yeah, I think there was some mixed bag in the process. I think mainly my concern was just the fact that I don't think
a lot of new council needed to be
very, yeah, and also recognize that they didn't have their first meeting this session. So,
But it still could be up in the air. The state council meeting with 5 or 6 new councilors, you need to convince a bunch of them to move forward. Because they haven't had any background.
Right.
That's the part.
Yeah.
Forcing a councilor with no background in this information to take a vote and change the vote.
Yeah, and I think it's very different in this context here, where there's also been this sort of needing an alternative legal, opinion sort of been bringing into the process, folks who sort of opining in there, and this sort of absence of directors of council, irrespective of where these opinions are coming from. That's when you would normally expect to be in the mix somewhere in there. Yeah.
That's just one question.
Yeah.
I don't want to take a lot of time. I know I'm usually. This 2C is really important, right? This section, this paragraph 2C.
Yeah.
Am I reading it correctly to say, if you have a non-conforming accessory structure, so let's say a building that's half in a setback and half within the building envelope, does that mean you can alter it within the allowable building envelope? Like I can add a foyer, but not on the non-conforming side, but on the conforming side?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, if you're doing it in a conforming manner, the actual work you're doing is in a conforming place and manner, that is going to be as of right.
So the way the zoning board, a lot of the regs that the zoning board, because that was on the GBA well, you're as long as you're not creating a new non-conformity, is the language more commonly used. That would just be here.
That was actually one of the things that I used to fix with 2C, and I would have preferred the language because 2D is if you're creating or extending a non-conformity.
Right.
I would have said to see if you're not creating or extending nonconformity, then it's clear that those are two alternatives.
Yeah.
But the way it is right now, it's not clear that there are two alternatives because you're using totally.
Right. So I mean, just if there's an ability to wordsmith that, but if the intent is right, if I'm right. That's great.
Yeah, you definitely have the intent right. I mean, I definitely appreciate Rick's point about this, using too much legalese and sometimes, where you sort of rewording to wordsmith, wordsmith that partly, and I'm partly responsible for some of the crafting and language here. Part of what I was working on these two pieces, but part of the phrasing in here that's actually part of the reason I was using certain phrases that's coming from the case law and the statutes is because we were having this debate about whether a special permit for nonconformity should be required. And the typical terminology there is things like extends or intensifies a nonconformity. So that's correct terminology to kind of maintain consistency. Everybody understands in the land use area what that means, and all the case laws are incorporated. In the case of C, where you're talking about doing just mere use of it or altering it in some way, it is not essentially when we say alter. It's just not triggering any dimensional concern. Nothing under zoning like in D down here is being changed. In essence, that is in a conforming way. That alteration, if it's adding a window, if it's putting a vent in, staircase or like that, if it's not changing anything dimensionally down here, and I think it's right, you could rephrase this. I definitely agree with the idea of sort of trying to wordsmith better. I think given where we work with the council, it probably behooved us to, pursue along the work that we have here. But you're right with the interpretation, and I agree with Brett, you could rephrase or flip that to say, sort of start with the same phrasing in both of them. Yes.
Well, the other phrasing is well tested, litigated. This is just a little new language. It's a little slightly fuzzier.
Yeah.
But I'm not on the ZBA anymore, so I don't have to deal with it.
You mean the alteration or justification?
Complying with current.
Use of alteration in conformance with current dimensional
Yeah.
controls.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Some of those words actually, those are mine. Some of that, this is actually, now we're getting to the sausage being made. So, and this is what happens when an amendment goes on for months on end sometimes, but when multiple folks are supposing the language changes, essentially, what you're seeing here, which is what's going to the city council packet, is showing the markup specifically as it's changing from the current ordinance. But there have been several versions of this document that have been amended over the last many months as we work through this process, just like there was back in 2025, at the beginning of the year, we were wrapping up the first change here. And so what happens is the colored word markup that we use overlaps over this black and white markup. And then when multiple people do that, it becomes very chaotic. So unfortunately, part of what we're seeing here is a mixture of people's verbiage, and it was a negotiation a bit between councilors about what they felt comfortable with sponsors. Some of the discussion, about from the office's recommendation of language changes from remaining consistent with statute. Some of it being sort of, floor amendment type stuff that was happening as we went along. So some of it's a mixture of different people's language.
So I mean, to that point, I hate it when I don't understand what language means and something that is. And last night, one of the changes that was made was to insert the word current. And I couldn't figure out what that, and why that was for running.
Yeah, quite frankly,
ordinance or anytime you read it.
Yeah. Well, great. It's a great point. I guess from my perspective, the way I look at that one is it's a superfluous word. It's not necessary. It doesn't really add much to it. You could basically read it without that word. It would mean the same meaning after reading as the regulations in effect at the time you're applying for permit. So to me, that word current was not necessary, but on the spectrum of all the debates that we have on everything, sometimes there are situations like this where, to me, it's conceding on one word being added. It doesn't really cause problems in my view. And it doesn't diminish necessarily. I'm trying to put the layperson hat on. To me, it doesn't change the meaning in any way. I don't think it adds problems per se. I also feel like it's an extra word that isn't needed. In some cases, councils or others, in this and other amendments have actually suggested words, be deleted in a good way to get rid of an extra word that's needed. So
from your point of view, that we can totally ignore that word.
You could ignore that word. Be in there, all things being equal, but it's just picking and choosing the battles of which things are important and which things would have an effect. This was one of those ones that, for instance, where it said in conformance with the building code, CMR, blah, blah, blah. This suggestion was made, just put the word stated, totally agree, no issue for me. But again, it would still have the same effect. It wouldn't really change the legal effect of saying the state building code.
To that, following up, I've drafted some alternative language for the courts and liens. I found the courts and liens piece to be hard to read. So draft of something that I can present to you, I can present at the public hearing on the 18th.
Yeah, if I could actually, maybe it's good to switch gears and motion. So even though you've been discussing that, that's a great point. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, just recognize what I've seen anyway. But two things I guess I would note just before I forget. One is when you're having the zoning hearing, please make an effort where we're not talking about the specific before you hear, because it's an open hearing and we should keep all that content here. To the extent I, as planning director, might be making reference as context for everybody, there's an application before the board, or here's, of course, Lane's scenario for the actually one we did, years ago. But just to give a context there, that's different, I think. So recognize it might be okay to sort of, as presenters or, counselors or myself are speaking to that piece of it, but it's good for you as board members because you actually have an open hearing. You're not deliberating on a matter related to that. You can kind of steer away from that, speak in more general terms about that. To that point, I guess, because the council, I don't speak on the board council, but I think because there's a desire to bring this tool back to you as soon as it's, feasible on their procedural end, which is bureaucracy, unfortunately, at best. Trying to do that, if you are able to, if we could work on that and like that together in advance, it'd be great. And always have to give deference to the planning board for its recommendation, the city council, for whatever decision made on the amendment. And sometimes that's, modified or goes into line for further committee meetings. But if it's something that you could wrap up as a group with, and you feel comfortable with either the original language proposed or this revised language or some other variation, it would be great as a general matter if there is the ability on this relatively small, tinkering with the zoning, to be able to come out of that night with language that does work for everybody, that maybe covers that ground that you're looking for, such that the city council could still timely act on it, even if it's different verbiage or, or even different approaches to where is that section.
You're saying that on the 18th?
On the 18th, just recognizing that, for even the planning development committee, after you're done with zoning amendments, oftentimes will say, we're going to keep it in committee and we're going to discuss it further before we bring it up. In this case, the committee, the council may be willing to, and may be thinking already, we don't necessarily want to keep it in committee. Maybe we want to also expedite some so that we can bring it to the floor of the proper. So if we're able to work on that, sponsors talking, with the office together in the language and being able to bring to the meeting, have ready to go essentially, or maybe even sort of distribute proposed to consider any revised language or alternative language, that would be great, if only because it would allow the possibility of still advancing in a timely way the tool that, we've all contemplated being beneficial.
We can't talk about it at the meeting, but
Great indirect reference.
maybe some of the councilors will be aware that this will give us leverage in the current discussion.
And they've actually heard that even during public comment, actually, in one of their meetings already. Heard that.
So we can say that they're not reviewing this.
And they're not, it's only your discussion. Yeah. You could even, frankly, you can say, it'd be helpful to us in an application we have before. It's just you don't want to go on the rabbit hole talking about any specific stuff. Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, the way it's written right now, the planning board can reduce any dimensional regulation up to 50%. So we can.
Right. That's up to you. Well,
Just saying, it's very extensive. We can't increase it, we can only reduce it. So we couldn't, for example, increase lot coverage. We could only reduce lot.
Right. Yeah, no, when you're a special granting authority, you're doing that sort of negotiation with an applicant about what, sometimes you might be looking and saying, look, in order to get out the other end, we need you to increase those setbacks. That's something that might happen as a result of your discretionary authority, where in this case, the reduction, you can only go down to 50%. The number that's,
But this is all discretionary.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I wanted to clarify, is that we could essentially, in consideration of the reduction in one area, we could increase something. So I'm going to change the wording to modification rather than direct reduction.
Yeah, gotcha. I guess one thought I guess I would say is I'm not necessarily convinced you need what we can talk about. Not necessarily convinced you need to put that in the ordinance. The reason I say it is the tool that you need, that you lack right now, is the ability to reduce some of those things without DBA for reduction. But you could, as a board, basically say, I don't necessarily know that you need to instruct zoning to say it. I think it might be sort of problematic to say, well, we're going to insert now a more restrictive zoning, and rather than saying, because we're in discretionary review and we're concerned about the impacts, we therefore are not going to be okay with this plan unless you agree to move this piece here. It might be better or more normal as a tool to use it that way, rather than trying to insert. We can talk
Well,
about.
yeah, I think we should just consider that, just,
Yeah.
it's, just so that the applicant is aware of it, because, you know, this
The
particular
flexibility,
applicant
yeah.
seems to think that he
Yeah.
can do anything.
Yeah.
That, you know, we're powerless in a sense, you know, we're just asking to move it around. With total discretion, but I think we should be able to tell people what our discretion is.
Yeah, I understand that there may be a desired application like this to look at, just the site. But I think it's certainly just, it's an application in which there was architectural review, say, for today's application. So it'd be very atypical in Newburyport to not see architectural plans. That's area, irrespective of what the applicant initially. So, without going down the rabbit hole now, happy to work, or look at those and defer to you all, and, if we sort of tweak our results. Just so you know, the framework, reiterate this as we go to the hearing, of course, but on that particular amendment, I tried to, recognizing all the other factors that go into it, the debate the city council might have, trying to structure it largely after a sort of a known quantity, which is what we have in the open space residential overlay, which is, or permit process, which is, the board can reduce some of those dimensional requirements, and there's this expectation of maybe a yield plan. The thing that I was, we could have a debate about. I'm not necessarily saying I'm wedded to that, meaning I'm not saying it'd be a problem to have a house per se versus more houses in some generic scenario. But I recognize the debate that then comes with, well, if you're giving this relief, does that just mean inherently we're going to? So without introducing that to the mix, you sort of started with the baseline of the generic this is more about reconfiguring the proper layout of the site without necessarily suggesting that there's an increase in density going with that per se. You can take it with that and modify it if you want. I was just trying to work out with something sort of a known quantity. And part of that was the parallel discussion I was having on a different event. Because in that case, while I started there with a very similar structure, but on that one, there needed to be more flexibility in the ground to make the project work. Detailed work sort of pick up on the early, sort of schematic development side. So in essence, it's minor changes really. But what I started with juice launches was language that we worked into this court's lanes one where it gives you greater flexibility to waive or reduce dimensionals, even more so than perhaps sponsors felt was necessary. So that one you might notice is where we got scaled back to very specific allowance of the volume basement where the addition could go, essentially it's zoning, rather than saying we're going to get the planning board latitude, particularly the sort of permit process, it was sort of spelling out in advance what that constraint was. So, and this is part of the sort of how much will the council feel comfortable handing off discretionary authority in which areas? In the case of the private school, the sponsors felt more comfortable training to find that at the outset. Versus the other amendment is at least starting with the premise, giving the planning board a little more flexibility with other.
Can I ask a question about this? Because that just would help me think about it. I haven't had a chance to think about it much, but maybe my imagination isn't good enough. But like with this is so simple. Would this render the OSRD obsolete? Like, would there be anyone who would want to do an OSRD?
Well, we're not going to see very much opportunity for OSRDs going forward just based on the individual parcel. And
right, you have the big picture of the city, so would there be another parcel that would probably ever have an OSRD? So would it be worth?
Well, this only affects up to 4 lots. So
yeah,
right. But is there another parcel? Right, I guess.
So if you have an OSRD, you're going to have a provision in that section where the applicant might be saying, "You look, corporate farm land." I know you may not have that before, but corporate farm land.
We're having all this money.
Right. Which is certainly not happening. Yeah. But if you think, putting aside the stable, they sort of 2 different names, but the stable sort of building one across the street, the one that we think of as the actual farmland, right? That cluster is really tight. In that scenario, the planning board waived and reduced some of the dimensional requirements, right? They allowed the clustering of the homes. There's a discussion of what the yield plan is. The developer proposes, in this case, 2 public benefits, mitigation, one's open space, the other one's housing. And then the 2 things get rolled in there. And as part of this overall scheme, the city gets better land, the developer maybe gets better land too. We can preserve open space. This is comparable to that, but the open space one, you essentially using it as a tool to take flexibility.
I guess it's the port. I didn't focus on. That's really what it is.
Yeah, I know it's like it could be. if it was, there's limited parcels now. that everybody knows of.
Wouldn't let you do a pocket, you know, like. Anyway, it's an improvement.
I mean, I think that what's, to that point, I mean, it was one of the things I mentioned, I think last time, was the idea of the cottage kind of idea. You can have multiple small units, and right now, and as a matter of fact, that was the issue with this one, why you couldn't put the driveway to the existing house on the lane, because that would have 5 lots rather than 4.
But you could have 2 lots adjacent to each other, and you can potentially do 2 fours.
2 4s, yeah. But I think that, you know, if you wanted, if you took one of the, you know, farm parcel in the agricultural conservation district and did an open space, you could do no SRD there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It gets us to the broader question of what came up with Highland Avenue is that the R2 zoning as it exists right now is completely inconsistent with the reality of the established neighborhood.
Most of the city.
And what Caswell is proposing as a private development. It is absolutely the wrong thing. So I would like us to keep in mind somehow that there needs to be a broader discussion. Zoning in general. And to me, we have to start scaling things down. Scenario, there's smaller parcels, there's smaller footprint housing. We got to start talking.
I can definitely tell you, just in discussion, it's about today, and we're going to be circling back and having discussion. We're definitely going to be having a discussion about that, and to some extent, it might be differentiation from one neighborhood to another, what things make sense or what doesn't. So being superimposed, you know, we were quite different, but even it's still a traditional sprawl subdivision, sort of lot size and dimensions sort of superimposed. So, you know, we tried some years back to broach the subject of right sizing the lots, and, you know, like reflecting what the neighborhood was, and we were met with, well, this is going to encourage too much growth and development. But I think the council, the new council session, seems to be a little bit more interested in revisiting this or looking at this area. And I think that's a good thing because we can talk about details, of course, but I definitely think we'll be discussing some more specificity, like what kind of rules or techniques or adjustments that make sense. You know, your ideas and dynamics as well.
I've been working on spreadsheet with all the different, you know, starting from that 2019 report about analyzing neighborhoods.
Yeah.
You know, there's a section of it that should be 4,000 lots. Not going to change the character of the area.
Yeah, right.
Another section, you know, we get up to my neighborhood, like 6 or 7 lots.
Yeah.
And not 10,000.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Even this 1960s and 50s and 60s, buried in Mosul, that's more like even.
Yeah. The assumption that you'll make yourself available for some of our meetings and discussions. Me too. Because, so we can work through the details of, you know, of that, yeah. Because I consider, you know, we've already discussed it already this. So, hope that's okay. Yeah.
It's fine. I'm interested.
Is there a state statutory reason why the lanes, I'm sorry, person lanes is for, or is that just what we decided?
There's a whole, unfortunately, there's a whole right across the Commonwealth, unfortunately, it's a patchwork of different D1 cities and towns, but there's comparable tools in other communities and towns, but it kind of varies slightly, you know.
Well, my question is, could we as a city decide the lanes shall certain more than 8?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if there was some reason.
For sure, yeah, yeah.
Now, if you go back to some planning text from the 70s, and, you know, there's a whole recommendation about changing the paved width of each serves and get bigger and bigger, you know, so your cartway is, you know, serving up to 4 houses and that kind of stuff.
So, yeah, so those are kind of the zoning things there. I do also, it might be, I know you're also interested in this one because we were talking before. I do want to pick up the business park piece of that, that updating of the business park zoning as well. And we have a council that I think is very interested in updating work on zoning, which is fantastic. So trying to utilize and work that together. I know we've talked straight low, but if there's anybody who's interested in similar working on that area, you know, we'll obviously be discussing here. we should bring back as a group, but I'd like to pick up the particulars where we left off. And sort of differentiation of Brook Road and other uses and things like, building height allowances, parking, lots.
Is that the draft that I did 3 years ago?
Pick that up, yeah,
We can just
yeah,
go start from there.
yeah.
Because it's not,
And then one other thing I'd just say as a reminder, as we go into any of that, is just recognizing it's sort of more apparent to me, and it's something I think we should just constantly have in our common collective now, is just the water supply limit at the end of the day, sort of long up in the future, recognizing that all these zoning changes, all these build outs that could happen for residential in particular, the demand that puts on water, every time we think about something new being added or changed, we also need to run that against the backstop of how many total units can we add between today and full build out. Can't provide any more water. That's something we need to keep up, trying to make sure it's on the horizon on the radar. So I have this diagram I put together now with the chart with water division, and I don't want anybody to get too attached to particulars because it's always a debate between which things are going to happen first and all that. But the whole picture is going to then illustrate for us, not just with Spring Avenue and Low Street, but also even with Waterfront West or with incremental zoning changes in neighborhoods. If we think about what could happen, all these lots get redeveloped, we should be cognizant always at the end of the day of if all those units are added up all together over time, what if we run into a situation we can't support the water? I do think it's important for us to always keep that, going forward, because at some point there definitely can be a disconnect. It could be very well be a disconnect in our zoning basically authorized much more than we can actually support the water. And that's something that the city hasn't really sort of looked at or acknowledged yet. So I do just want to make sure that we consider that as we go into all future related use discussions. Recognizing that for good reason, I think every state community is kind of expanded the district there. That has substantial units, we need to make sure we're accounting for those and then what's left.
And working with that community,
We wouldn't discuss that. Sorry.
Oh, I was saying, and working with the communities that we share our water with, that are under the same development requirements.
Correct, and we've got placeholders for their potential units as well, the ones that we would have potentially assume.
Do they have a timetable set to discuss serious reconstruction or replacement of the water treatment facility and speaking with the task force?
That's actually, I suspect in this capital improvement cycle in the spring with the city council, between the administration and the city council, we have a lot more discussion in this capital improvement cycle of the water supply system and in particular, the water plant itself. There's been a lot more interest as we were finishing up the last council session. They had a committee, focused on it. It seemed to be a lot more interest given the various options, pros and cons. The new plant rather than trying to continually and one or two more times retrofit the plant and spend a ton of money doing it, but then still run up with the plant that a couple of years, down the road, still has to be totally replaced anyway. So the discussions are, seems to be coming along the lines of maybe it makes more sense to have a whole plant redone that has greater capacity, deals with, PFAS and all this, other stuff. And what I'm trying to make sure is the mix of all this, of course, is also part of that we also think about at the end of the day, no matter what the plant can do, the aquifer can only get so much. And so that's also in the mix. And so the plant being or the aquifer becomes our cap. That just is sort of, always on the horizon and our master plan update is kind of recognized that every future discussion, people are always saying, when I'm going to hear saying, oh, are we reaching that point? And the city never gets to a point where it just irresponsibly concedes to more development and permitting that it can provide water. That's a disconnect that unfortunately shouldn't happen. And even though state agencies and federal agencies may not always coordinate effectively, we should try to do that properly here.
Yeah, we just do a desalination plant.
Yeah, no problem. I don't know if there's other questions about those.
Motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Go around the room one more time. Brian.
Yes.
Alden.
Yes.
Jamie.
Yes.
Rick.
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm a yes. Meeting adjourned.